I went to the Ripley Aquarium today. You guys been to there here in Toronto? My wife and I go to lots of aquariums, and we enjoy them. And it prompted a lot of questions that I thought might get us to talk a little bit more about evolution, about the public understanding of evolution, and what the roadblocks to that understanding might be, if that's...
Great. I'm glad you say aquariums, not aquaria, by the way, here. We're speaking English, not Latin here.
Oh, see, and I could steal a joke from Judah Friedlander right now, but I won't, about English. I keep missing my thing. So we were at the Ripley Aquariums, and we, of course, saw many wonderful animals there. And if that, for my wife and I, prompts a discussion about what we used to believe, or whether or not, because I can't recall if I always accepted. I know I was taught about evolution in school, but I can't recall if I always accepted it. It seemed to always be colored with this idea that there was a God in there monkeying around somewhere. Is there any realistic probability that any thinking agent could have been monkeying around in the process based on what we know at this point?
No. I have to be careful here because I was once being interviewed on television by a dreadful man whose name has mercifully escaped me. And I didn't realize that he was a sort of plant for intelligent design. And he asked me whether I could think of any what's the best scenario I could think of for life on this planet being intelligently designed. And so I thought, well, I'll give him the best shot, which is directed panspermia, the idea that Francis Crick and Leslie Orgel put out, which was that some alien civilization in a distant planet wanted to preserve their form of life. Perhaps they were going extinct or something of that sort. So they put bacteria of their form of life in the nose cone of a spaceship and sent it off into space, and it landed here and started life here. Now, I said, of course, I don't for a moment believe that, but you've asked me what's the best possibility for life to be designed in this by an alien. And he said, wait a minute. Richard Dawkins believes in little green men. And this has dogged me ever since. And I regularly get on Twitter, this is the guy who believes in aliens seeding life on this planet and so on.
This is something we've spoken about before, where it seems that there are some people who are going to either intentionally misunderstand or misrepresent what you've said, what anybody said, or they are so horribly confused that they don't seem to understand the basics of the English language. Now, I know that many of them are from the United States, and we've kind of butchered the English language. But as I walked around the aquariums today, and I made that note too, that there were multiples, my wife mentioned something to me that you see just at the aquariums a broad diversity of life. And I can understand how someone who hasn't been trained and taught about natural selection and the process and the length of time involved could look at this and just say, I give up. I don't understand. It has to be magic. Somebody has to have done it. We should be teaching this. I know there are schools in the United States that don't, even though they're supposed to. Apart from just saying this needs to be the curriculum, what can we as a community do to encourage the sort of teaching and training on evolutionary theory that we need?
I think I give up is actually quite a respectable response, because it is astounding how complicated life is and how beautiful it is, how diverse it is, and how it looks designed. And so I could well imagine people saying, I give up. However, to say it must have been created, I mean, that's just illogical, because it's no more easy to explain the origin of a creator than it is to explain the origin of the complexity of life itself. It's a total and complete non-explanation. So before Darwin came along, it would have been perfectly respectable to say, I give up. it's incredibly complicated. There must be an explanation, but I can't think of it. And then Darwin came along and did think of it. But to say, therefore, it must have been designed is a total and complete cop-out. It doesn't explain anything.
It's actually contradictory. If you say, I give up, it must have been designed, then you haven't given up.
Yeah.
You've offered an explanation.
Exactly.
And you don't even care if it's true.
Exactly. So you asked me, what can we do to teach it? Well, you can write lots of books, as I've done. But then, of course, they've got to read them, and which is more of a problem. You can do television, I suppose. I've done a bit of that as well. It is very difficult to get across. I mean, one of the problems is the sheer time involved. Nobody can grasp the immensity of time that geology allows, in which evolution has happened. It is absolutely colossal. And so all our intuitions about the rate at which evolution might go let us down. We can't really understand how you could go from one species to another, let alone from a microbe to mammalian life. So getting across the sheer time scale is one thing. And there are various analogies, you're probably familiar with them, lots of them. One that I rather like is the one where you stretch your arm out. I didn't invent this, somebody else did. And you say the middle of your throat, the middle of my tie here, is the origin of life. And the tip of my finger is the present. And the time involved, you've got, the dinosaurs didn't come until about there. So way near the present. The Homo sapiens arrived at about my fingernail there. And the whole of human history, the whole of recorded history, the Egyptians and the Babylonians and the Persians and the Jews and the Greeks and the Romans, and all of human recorded history flies away in the dust from one stroke of the nail file. So we're accustomed to thinking of human history as long. We think in the mists of time back to the ancient Greeks, back to the ancient Egyptians. We think so long ago. It's nothing. It's just, as somebody else said, it's just before the stroke of midnight on the clock face of the geological time.
Yeah, there's a couple difficulties there. Not only our inability to properly grasp the timescales, but also our ego and our sense of self-importance. And how it seems strange that everything we know about humans could vanish in that analogous stroke of a nail.
I mean, another analogy, I think, I can't remember, it might have been Mark Twain who suggested the layer of paint on top of the Eiffel Tower. That's humanity. But the timescale involved is one thing. Another point you have to get across is that it is not chance. There are an awful lot of people who think they can simply dismiss evolution because it's the theory of chance. Well, any fool can see it can't possibly be a theory of chance. I mean, chance couldn't possibly give rise to the beauty, the elegance, the sheer designedness, the apparent designedness of living things. It cannot be that. The whole enterprise is to get away from random chance and to substitute something else. And Darwinian natural selection is the only substitute that has ever been proposed that could work.
The idea that there maybe there's chance involved in when and how a mutation occurs, or there may be chance involved in which weather storm might separate someone. But in the broad scheme, this is physical law acting on matter, following, not prescribed by an intelligence, but following the natural order.
Yes, there has to be chance, of course, in mutation and the weather and things like that. But the driving force towards the illusion of design, the beauty of the design of an eye or a wing or a foot or a heart, and the diversity of life, the driving force is non-random natural selection.
And I always wanted to ask you, there are people who grasp things more clearly at different ages. And I know young kids who are thrilled to learn good science and are fascinated with dinosaurs. And Darwinian natural selection just makes sense to them. It's like the first time you hear it, it's, well, of course that's the case. For others, it seems to be a little more difficult. either based on their upbringing, I don't know what all the factors might be. But when you see a fish that is demonstrating amphibian-like qualities, it's coming up onto land and it has flippers that are close to fin, there are people, or close to feet, there are people who would look at that and say, wow, I get it. I get how
Yes,
this...
yeah.
And there are others, like one of my wife's relatives, looked at an example of that. One of my relatives would do this too, so I'm not just beating up on her family. But she looked at this and she said, isn't it wonderful what God can create?
Yeah. Those fish are lovely because they're doing much more recently. They've re-evolved what our ancient ancestors did in the Devonian era. And so they come out of the water, they walk around, they jump, they even climb trees. It's wonderful to see these fish. They have various names like frogfish and things like that.
But I always just presume that you, as a young boy, just immediately got this.
No, I didn't. I think it was my father who first explained natural selection to me, and I understood it, but I didn't think it was a big enough theory to account for the elegance of life. It was only later that I apprehended that.
And it's going to be a different answer for everybody, but do you know what it was that made the change in you from, okay, that's interesting, I don't quite get it, to, oh my gosh, this is a profound statement that people aren't grasping?
I don't remember that, but it is a profound statement, and it has to be in a way because it took so long for humanity to get it. I mean, it took till the middle of the 19th century, and I've always been baffled by why, in a way, people like Newton and Hume and Aristotle didn't get it, because it is actually a very simple idea. It's not like relativity or quantum theory. It's not profoundly difficult, but it's, I suppose, profoundly counterintuitive. I think, as you've suggested, Matt, it's kind of, you almost can't believe that something so complicated and beautiful as life could possibly come into being by such a simple idea as the non-random survival of random variation. So I think that may be why it took until the middle of the 19th century for Darwin and Wallace independently to get it. And I expect they had resistance to it when they first thought of it.
And how fortunate are we that it's become sufficiently understood that now school children can, grasp this and have a good understanding of it. I think one of the reasons it seems so strange to me, I agree with you, that it seems like someone should have thought of this earlier, because we had domesticated animals, we domesticated crops,
yes.
We had been doing the things that nature does.
Exactly, and this was one of the main points Darwin made. Darwin used domesticated animals as his sort of introductory argument. He said, look at how powerful selection is, look at how we've managed to change rock doves into all the various breeds of pigeons, look how we managed to change flowers, wild roses into domestic roses. Wolves have become dogs of all these different breeds that are totally unlike wolves, and yet they've been transformed from the wolf in just a matter of centuries. So what Darwin did was say, look what can be done by artificial selection. Now all you need do is that mental flip that says, you don't need a breeder, you don't need a human breeder to come along and choose the dogs to breed from. Nature will do that for you. So the power of artificial selection is harnessed in a slightly different way by nature, and nature is the breeder that produces all of life.
There's a confusing array of creationist models. There are the people who think that the world was created in 7 literal days and that these represent ages. I can understand the people who, I don't understand why they think the Earth is 6,000 to 10,000 years old now. That's an untenable position. But if that's what they believe, I can understand why understanding evolution would be more difficult for them, because they don't even accept that that time is there. But I'm more baffled by the apologists and creationists who think, oh, of course, the universe is 13.7 billion years old, the Earth's 4.5 billion, but that's still not enough time when we have the evidence.
Yeah, there are people like that. There was a nice story told by J.B.S. Haldane, the great British geneticist, one of the founders of the neo-Darwinian synthesis. And after a lecture, a lady stood up and asked him a question and put exactly this point. She said, Professor Haldane, I simply can't believe that there's been enough time, even given billions of years, to go from a single-celled ancestor to something like me, a multicellular creature, trillions of cells with the heart and lungs and brain and kidneys and bones and things. Just doesn't make sense. Madam, you did it yourself, and it only took you 9 months. To which, of course, she could have retorted, yes, but that in that 9 months the process was supervised by DNA, or she would have called it genes in those days. And that, of course, is correct. And what evolution does, what natural selection does, is to choose those genes that supervise the embryological process that does that amazing trick in 9 months.
So in this process, one of the key aspects that we come up against is transitional forms, and people have different views of what that means. So a creationist might say, oh, you haven't found any transitional forms, or you haven't found a missing link. And for years, when I'm asked this question on the show, well, first of all, I point out that that you're calling into the atheist experience, and I'm not a biologist, and if you maybe you're talking to the wrong guy about this. But I had always responded that everything is a transitional form, that all of us are a transition between our ancestors and our progeny. And this, I don't know that this has the impact on others that it had on me, because they seem to be looking at it backwards. Backwards, it's a little easier to say, oh, this is clearly a transition.
Yes, I mean, everything is potentially a transition. Not everything actually is, but potentially it is. Michael Shermer makes rather a nice point, which is that when there's a gap in the fossil record, which there is in quite a number of places, because fossilization is quite a rare event, so that we have this gap, and they say, there's a gap. And then somebody finds a fossil right in the middle of the gap, which is a transitional form. Now we've got 2 gaps.
And then they told 2 friends, and they told 2 friends, and so on. It's interesting to me that so much emphasis, I think, as people were battling against this idea in the modern era, because we're trying to teach it in schools, and of course there are religious people objecting, this idea of a missing link kept coming up.
Well, the missing link was in Victorian times, that meant the missing link between apes and humans, and there were no fossils, no hominid fossils in Darwin's time. Darwin looked at the modern anatomy of chimpanzees and gorillas and correctly inferred that we are African apes, that we evolved in Africa. And since that time, of course, there have been lots and lots of fossils discovered in South Africa, in East Africa, and even North Africa. So we have lots and lots of links. They're not missing anymore. They're missing on the chimpanzee side of the divide, because you have a common ancestor which lived about 6 million years ago, and then it branched and went down one side towards chimpanzees and bonobos, which branched again there, and then the other side went down to humans. And we've got plenty of fossils down the human line, so there's no dearth of links there. They're no longer missing. There aren't any fossils down the chimpanzee line, and that's regrettable. It may be because they're forest dwellers and it's more difficult to fossilize in forest conditions. But there are plenty of missing links, no longer missing.
But you can't know, you weren't there.
Yeah. Yes. How do you deal with that kind of thing? Yes, of course. And one analogy that I like to use to that is to say a detective comes upon the scene of a crime after it's been committed, more or less by definition, and works out what happened. Sherlock Holmes, Hercule Poirot. They look at fingerprints, they look at footprints, they look at all the cues that are available around, there's a window open or the window closed or whatever it might be, and you work out what happened by looking at the clues. That's sort of what we do. But the difference is, whereas Sherlock Holmes or Hercule Poirot had a limited number of clues, we have millions and millions and millions of clues. We have fossils, we have the geographical distribution of animals and plants on islands and continents of the world. They're distributed in exactly the places they should be distributed if evolution had taken place. We look at fossils, we look at molecular, comparative molecular sequencing. You can sequence the DNA or the proteins of any creature you like, animal or plant, and you can find genes that are clearly the same gene, but with differences in the details. And so you can literally count the number of discrepancies between a human and a possum, or a human and a beetle. It doesn't matter what it is. You can find a gene where it's obviously the same gene, and you can literally count the number of letter discrepancies between them. And you plot it all out, and you find a beautiful hierarchical tree, a beautiful pedigree. It's got to be a pedigree. And so that's what you can do with molecular data. That's sort of what Darwin himself was able to do with bones and comparative anatomy. And that's persuasive enough, goodness knows. But with molecules, it's even more persuasive. So you don't have to have been there. I mean, the evidence is just mountainously high.
I think this ties back a lot into different views of knowledge, where when it's convenient, they would like there to be certainty. And I'm always happy to point out that they believe in Jesus, and they weren't there when he was crucified as well. So clearly, we can infer some things and come to reasonable conclusions. When we talk about science, it's a couple of the beautiful things about science is that it's self-correcting, and yet the creationists will just constantly point to, oh, here's an anomaly, here's an error, here's a mistake, here's a hoax, as if they could disprove evolution and all of a sudden their creation model wins. And to me, it was, even if we found out tomorrow that everything we understood about natural selection were wrong, that still wouldn't lend any credence to it.
That's right. No, I mean, you have two hypotheses, A and B, and A has a lot going for it, and B has nothing whatever going for it. So, and then you find a single slight discrepancy. Something went wrong with A, as you say, a hoax, Piltdown man, whatever it is. Right, that's it for A. Must be B. And that's the level of logic we have to deal with.
Oh, you have an alibi. Oh, the butler did it then. Yes, we're done.
Exactly, yes, exactly.
So one of the aspects of this is that we have a model that is testable and a model that makes predictions. For example, we predicted, based on all of our understanding, where to go dig in order to find something like Tiktaalik. And this is, you can feel free to make a face and scoff because it's what I did when I thought of the question. What would creationists have to do, potentially, to turn their proposition into a testable claim at all?
I cannot think of what they could do, unfortunately. It would be nice if can you think of anything? I mean,
no, that's...
Yeah. I'm
asking you.
I mean, they can up the ante on finding difficulties for evolution. I mean, Darwin wrote a chapter in The Origin of Species called Organs of Extreme Complexity, and he took things like the eye and the heart, and he showed how, although on the face of it, it seems almost too difficult to explain, nevertheless you can explain it. You don't actually need to. I mean, if somebody comes to me and says, I bet you can't explain the elbow joint of the lesser spotted weasel frog. And I'd say, well, actually, I've never heard of the lesser spotted weasel frog, and so I can't explain it. Right, that's it. You can't explain it. God must have done it. The proper answer is no. I don't know how to explain that, but let's do a bit of research on it. Let's go to work on it. Let's examine. Let's go and find some weasel frogs and examine them and dissect them and see how they behave, and we'll see if we can do it. But even if we fail, that doesn't mean that the alternative theory B is the right one. It could be that we just aren't clever enough to think of the alternative. I've satirized the argument as the argument from personal incredulity. You say, I can't understand how this could have happened, therefore God must have done it. But that's the negative thing. That's trying to find flaws in evolution. You've asked me what testable hypothesis could they put forward? What experiment could they do, say? I used to think that something like God coming down out of the clouds and bellowing in a great, loud Paul Robeson voice, "I created everything." That would be moderately convincing, but I still... I still would actually fall back on Hume on miracles and say, isn't it actually more probable that I'm hallucinating or being hoaxed by some clever conjurer like Matt? Perhaps an alien conjurer from outer space.
Yeah. This is, technology sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic. How the hell can I tell the difference? And
Yeah.
this is why I changed the answer I gave about what would change my mind to I have no idea.
Yes, quite.
But if there is a God, he knows, and he hasn't done it, so
Yeah.
the hell with him. But the God voice, maybe if he just said, "I created the platypus," because that's a confusing creature for many people.
Well, when they were first, when the first platypus was sent to London for examination, it was thought to be a hoax. It was thought to be somebody had stitched together a duck's bill and a
P.T. Barnum created the platypus right
Yeah.
after the Fiji mermaid.
yeah.
I'm going to shift topics just a little bit because we talked before about the world we're living in, about the information that people get and how it is almost being curated for them by social media, that you get spoon-fed things. But I want to touch on a different aspect of this, and that is reaching conclusions based on headlines only.
Oh, yeah.
Have you seen what... Not only do we live in a world where headlines are already sensationalized to draw your attention, but I find over and over again, people will read the headline and not the article, not the content, certainly not any references, and just broadcast on social media.
They do, that's right, and I think this is one of the reasons why science has a problem, a public relations problem, because so often a headline will appear in a tabloid newspaper which will say something like, "X causes cancer, scientists show." And then next week, the same X cures cancer, scientists show. And so the headlines obviously contradict each other, but the details may not. It could be that X both causes and cures cancer. Maybe it has a U-shaped dose-response curve, so that if you're plotting the effect of the amount of X there and the effect on cancer there, there's a U-shaped curve, and if you're on that part of the U, it has a positive effect on cancer. That part of the curve, it has a negative effect, and so it does both cause and cure. The contradictory headlines, though, will lead people to say, "Oh, well, scientists just contradict themselves, so we can't believe science anymore." And that's very sad, and I think that obviously journalists bear some blame for that, but also scientists who not publish, but announce their results prematurely and in a sort of half-baked way, so that it's almost meat and drink to journalists wishing to pick up the story. So I think that is a serious problem, and scientists need to think about how to handle that.
I think there's so much concern that people don't value science and people aren't sufficiently science educated that some scientists are like, "Oh, we need to get this out here and let's do it in a way that's exciting." So I've seen headlines that science has proved that we are living in a simulation, and then recently that we are not living in a simulation. And if you actually dig in on what the papers say, they say neither of those. Just this week, even a day or so ago, getting outside the realm of science, I saw a headline that was, "Pope allows debates on married priests." And people read the headline and their immediate assumption is, oh, the Catholic Church, maybe they're coming around and they're going to allow priests to marry. And that has absolutely nothing to do with what was being discussed. This has happened several times before, that the Episcopalian priests who were married, the Catholic Church would like to lure them in to be priests and allow them to stay married. They just can't have sex anymore.
Not with women anyway.
Yeah, depending on how long you've been married, maybe it's not a problem. I don't know. But this is a marketing strategy. This is, hey, the Catholic Church is losing out to Protestants in the Amazon region. we're not really going to change Catholicism, but we'll change parts of Catholicism in the Amazon region just so that we can reach more people.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
But they're not coming around. They're not coming around on sex at all.
No. So the headline is misleading. Quite right. Yes.
I wish they would come around on sex.
Yes.
That's not just funny. I find it bizarre that this one particular church has perhaps more sexual hang-ups than any other. You know, they're going to prohibit the very thing that one would argue perhaps makes us human, the desires that we have, the interaction, the stuff that has produced who we are. Nope, can't have anything to do with that.
Yeah.
While they hide rapists.
Yeah.
I think they have a duty to do better, but
Yeah.
Sermon over for this. Something happened today that we spoke about briefly. I found out the news, and we don't have a lot of information, but there were a couple of questions that I had where I wanted to get your perspective. For those who aren't aware, just outside of San Antonio today, in a small town, someone pulled out an automatic weapon and killed 27 people in a Baptist church, the First Baptist Church of this town. We don't yet know what the motivation is. The individual who did this was killed. Hypothetically, if we were to discover that this was some prominent member of a local atheist community who had decided to target a church, how would you respond to this shooting?
These things are so appalling. I don't think I want to get into hypotheticals like that. I think we don't know what happened. And my immediate reaction is to be obviously horrified and to feel this person is surely going to be insane, and every country has its lunatics, and the difference is that in the United States there are so many guns around that lunatics can get hold of guns. And so I almost don't want to ask what the motive is, because I don't think such an appalling act has a thing you could call a motive anyway. This is just a nut who has managed to get hold of a gun, and it's going to go on and on happening as long as guns are so readily available in the United States. And so I think the only lesson I would wish to draw from it is, for goodness sake, United States, sort out your gun problem.
And I certainly echo a great deal of the sentiment there. The reason I was kind of hoping to get to a hypothetical is because invariably we don't tend to find that this is the case. And there's everything inside of me wants to say, oh yeah, that's such an unlikely possibility that we just shouldn't even bother with it. But I would like to think that the broader secular humanist community would very quickly and easily just denounce all forms of violence and violence threats along these lines, to show that we're in a different headspace than, for example, if it was a rival church or something along those lines. You may be correct about whether or not he was, or what his mental capabilities were, but the reason it struck me was I had a debate with the debate that we spoke about the other night. The preacher who knows nothing about evolution was talking about banging sticks and rocks together to get puppies. And he's reported that since the debate's been posted, he's received threats of death threats and violence threats. And I immediately posted on Facebook a statement saying that, if it's anybody who's a fan or a follower of mine, go the fuck away. You are part of the problem. I don't need you. I don't want you advocating for violence and other stuff. I'm not sure I believe his claim, but I wanted to make a distinction between how we are going to respond to violent acts, because there's nothing within atheism or secularism there's no ideology that would encourage someone to.
No, of course not. I mean, that's absolutely right. And if it was a follower of ISIS, then we could say he probably isn't insane. I mean, if it was a follower of ISIS doing something like this, then it's done because he thinks it's the righteous thing to do. He thinks he's doing the will of his God. He thinks he's going to earn a place in heaven, in paradise, because he has slain some infidels and gone to a martyr's heaven or whatever it is. So there is a perfectly logical progression going from certain kinds of religious belief to these horrible acts of mass murder. There simply is not a logical progression that goes from atheism to doing any such thing. And so if it incidentally happened to be somebody whose philosophical position, insofar as such a person could have a philosophical position, was atheism, it would be utterly irrelevant. This will just be a sick individual who has a gun. So that, although it's possible to formulate a logical progression from religious belief of a certain kind to violent murder, there is no logical progression that goes from atheism to violent murder. How could there be?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I've got one more question topic I want to hit real quick. So for those of you who had questions, if you can quietly, without disturbing people, start moving out to there. We'll get to questions pretty soon. But I've heard that you're working on another book. And I know that everybody here will want to hear about it.
Okay. I've started work on a book which my tentative title is Atheism for Children. No. I rather suspect that it may not end up with that title. It will be that content, but it may not be that title. The word children is a problem because many children prefer not to be called children, especially as this is actually aimed at kind of 12, 13, 14-year-olds, so it's more like atheism for young adults, atheism for teenagers. I don't want it to sound as though it's indoctrinating, which would be another reason not to call it that. Another suggestion that I've had made to me is, Mum, I think I'm an atheist. Anyway, I've written about 5 chapters in a very tentative draft, and the first one is about how many, many gods there are, and so it's not clear why the particular god that the child has been brought up in is the right one. And then there's quite a lot on evolution, because I think that's one of them. I mean, the lure of creationism is quite strong. There's one on the good book and how utterly appalling it actually is, how dreadful. And I've said before that the God of the Old Testament is the most unpleasant character in all fiction. And so it documents that. I plan a chapter on miracles, perhaps a chapter on prayer, a chapter on why we don't need God to be good. And it'll be illustrated. It'll be rather along the same lines as the children's book I wrote a few years ago called The Magic of Reality. It'll be the same style as that, but more of a kind of young person's version of the God delusion.
And it wasn't clear about this, and I will catch heat for this later. So the microphones are set up. We want people to line up on the outside so we're not blocking anybody's view, and then one at a time we'll have you walk up to either microphone. I'm assuming that the chapter on miracles is a look into miraculous claims and not just like a list of actual miracles, because that would be a very short chapter.
Yes. Sure, yes.
Perhaps just, miracles, and then just say none known, next chapter.
That'd be good, yeah.
I find that interesting, both the topic and the target, and I'm glad that you pointed out that this is something very different from indoctrination. This is about giving material to people who are coming of age and realizing they don't believe the things that other people believe or that they've been taught. I recall I was a believer for way too many years. Almost embarrassing how long it took me to figure this shit out. But everybody finds it in their own time, and so I keep running across young people, or teenagers, and they're facing, hey, how do I tell my family, or should I tell my family, and how do I deal with my family? Should I do like a big coming out thing, or should this be more organic? And I'm always just impressed that they've put way more thought into this at an earlier age than I ever did. I was so busy focusing on what the church wanted me to do and being in an insulated environment where, I'd never heard of Thomas Paine. I didn't know that much about, the science you were taught in school, sure, but beyond that, I'm just impressed at the way the world is changing thanks to you, thanks to the various media outlets, thanks to the internet, where I don't know if we have more young atheists than ever, but it certainly feels that way.
Well, I think we do in America and in Western Europe. I wish I could say the same of the Islamic world. I think things are even moving in the right direction there. I'm rather fond of quoting the fact that there's a bootleg copy of The God Delusion in Arabic, which... For which I get no royalties. And it's downloadable as a PDF. And what's rather nice is that it has been downloaded 13 million times.
I think if it's downloaded 1 million more times, it will be as worn as a Grateful Dead concert recording. But can we have the house lights up just a little bit so we can maybe see the folks on the microphones a little bit? We'll start on this side. Whoever's at the front, come on over, state your name if you're comfortable with that, and ask your question.
Okay, it works.
It works.
Oh, yeah. Hi, Professor Richard. Just because you just mentioned about the God Delusion in Arabic, I was living in the Middle East, and my friend got a copy of the God Delusion. His name was Muhammad, and he was one of the biggest reasons why I'm atheist today. And it's just phenomenal to just believe how your impact just would reach all the way to the other side of the world with your book.
Which country is that?
Well, we live in Qatar, so
I'm going to Qatar in a couple of months' time.
Oh.
Yeah.
I was wishing to get a copy of your sign. Planning the God Delusion to bring it to him.
So you have a friend called Mohammed, and he told... I didn't quite get the full story.
So my friend, his name is Mohammed, and he read the book called God Delusion, and basically from that book, he got... basically, it was the basis for him to convert to atheism.
Yeah.
And, it was big influence on my ideas.
Did he read it in English or Arabic?
I believe he read it in English, actually.
Okay. Well, that's very good to hear. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I wanted to ask a question. I know
Yes,
I
please,
said
go
a
ahead.
paragraph in the beginning.
Yeah.
I'm about to hang up, but you're so nice. Just go ahead and do the question.
I guess I've asked Sir Sam Harris in the previous event about free will, because I don't believe in free will and he doesn't believe in it either, and it sort of put me in a place where I feel like depressed about life in a way that I feel like I don't have control over my ability to change my life, because my genetics are sort of determines everything that is gonna happen to my life. So it feels like there's like little to do with how much I can change about my life if my IQ is constant and my genetics are also sort of.
So what's your question?
My question is, I guess I'm questioning how, I guess, your views on free will and how genetics affect people's ability to sort of control their life.
I hate the free will question. I usually resort to Christopher Hitchens' answer to the question, do you have free will? Christopher Hitchens' answer to the question, do you have free will? I have no choice. I don't think you should feel distressed about it. I mean, I think that probably the consensus of scientists today would be yes, everything we do is determined. No need to drag genes in, by the way. I mean, that genes are no more deterministic than anything else. I mean, just any sort of antecedent physical cause may determine, does determine what you do. But the illusion of free will is so powerful that you live your life as though you have free will. We all do. So cheer up.
And I will, I'll throw in a quick addendum that I am a compatibilist a la Dennett, and Sam Harris and I were arguing free will the other night, and I'm sure we will again. And when we come to some sort of agreement that I think will benefit other people, maybe he'll share that. Yes, sir.
Hi, Professor Dawkins. Thank you for a lifetime of everything. I just want you to complete the punchline to my favorite joke ever. Are you ready? Why are there so many old people in church?
You've read my quotation. It was an Australian friend who asked this question: why are there so many old people in church? And his answer was, cramming for the final.
Oh, that wasn't the question?
No.
You're cheating.
This has been 11, so he took forever. I'm going to be real quick. This has been 11, and I really want to start a bit of a fight. I've seen you on your atheist experience, aren't really convinced in the design of evolution, that a polar bear is designed for its niche in that environment. I've seen you argue against that.
Sorry, who are you talking to?
An atheist, to Matt, and I want you to convince him that design is
I have
real.
no idea what you're talking about.
I've seen you hang up on people, say it's not designed, it's not, and...
No, it's not designed. If by design you are talking about an intentional going forward with a purpose.
It doesn't have to be intentional. It can be designed.
This is
design
semantic.
is intentional. No. Here's the thing. This is really easy. Design is intentional. The appearance of design need not be.
Do you agree with that, Richard?
Well, I think what you're thinking of is that Dan Dennett has redefined the word design to include unconscious design. And so it's just semantics. You can define design as being deliberate, intentional design, or you can define design as looking as though it's been designed in that sense, beautifully arranged so that everything works. Dennett's definition is that, and he wants us to all change our usage, our meaning of the word design. And that is a semantic thing. Words are our servants, not our master.
Yeah, we just don't disagree on this at all. And we don't disagree on the fact that we don't need to be prescriptivist with language as long as we're communicating a topic. Yes, from this side, please.
Hello. Thank you both for coming. And out.
Yeah.
Crowd. My question is regarding several days ago we had festivities for Halloween. My friend went as Gaddafi. And I thought that was pretty scary, but the scariest thing in my opinion is alienation in society, best described with the scream of Edward Munch. And I ask you, Richard and Matt, to comment on whether, as scientists, we are alienating ourselves. I mean, my family is more concerned with whether I earn a living than whether I fulfill my happiness of botany. And Pythagoras was in a ancient civilization where they were looked at as elite and away from and separate from and distinct from society. And I believe that when I introduce myself, describe what I do, I like to introduce myself as a naturalist. I study nature. That's what I'm passionate about. And by describing myself as a scientist, I believe I alienate myself from them because they don't understand what a scientist is.
It's not sexy and lauded the way it used to be, is kind of what you're saying.
Yeah.
Well, that's their problem. I mean, you're doing the right thing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a question for Professor Dawkins. You have an amazing video that's on YouTube that's been around for decades, I imagine. It's about how the eye has been able to evolve. And until I've seen that video, I did not comprehend how it's possible for that to happen. And I understand now how the eye could evolve. But now I have another question regards metamorphosis. That seems like such an unbelievable type of process for an egg to form into a caterpillar. That caterpillar wraps itself up in a cocoon, liquefies, and comes out like a beautiful angel with wings. Can you give us any kind of insight into how evolution can have done that?
Ladies and gentlemen, the argument from personal incredulity. The lesser spotted weasel frog.
Which, by the way, you just made up that name, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a,
I was going to go back to my amphibian.
Okay, I mean, it is a very, very beautiful problem. Thank you for bringing it up. I mean, a caterpillar and a butterfly are two totally different kinds of animal, but they have the same genome, and one turns into the other. And as you say, I mean, the caterpillar feeds on plants, and it's an eating machine. It's a machine for building up the sheer amount of goods, the amount of stuff in the caterpillar. And then the caterpillar more or less dissolves internally and uses the material that is built up in all this eating of plants, uses the material to build a butterfly or a moth, which is purely almost entirely a nectar feeding machine, and the nectar is just aviation fuel. It's a winged carrier of gametes, of sperms or eggs. And so it's the reproductive phase. And as you say, it is a very strange thing that's happened, that natural selection could favor using the same genome two entirely different ways of life. A vegetarian feeding machine, and then an aerial nectar-eating reproduction machine. It's happened. Natural selection works on the same genes or different genes to produce these two different ways of life. I don't think I can do anything really to dispel your natural incredulity. I prefer to call it wonder. It is wonderful, and it's a very extreme example, and I love it. I mean, but I don't think I can really answer your incredulity. Yeah.
I've always kind of wondered about that as well. You know, nature's found a number of different solutions to different problems, and when you look at the egg to larva, is that process with the chrysalis and the butterfly, is it really that much different than other methods, or are we seeing a strange line where the early stage actually does some function and the later stage doesn't?
Yes, I mean, it's less extreme in other creatures where the animal, I mean, you have to grow from an egg to an adult, and so you go through a number of stages. The thing that's special about caterpillars is that they go out into the world and they live a life as a vegetarian. They do a completely different kind of ecology from the, they behave like an adult.
So it'd be different from, far different from maggots to flies, even
Well,
though they're in the world.
not that different actually, but a kind of more extreme, I suppose. I mean, there are some rather remarkable, axolotls a good example, where the larval stage, I mean, as you know, tadpoles have a different way of life from frogs, and in axolotls, the tadpole stage has its own way of life, and then it becomes reproductively mature as a tadpole, and never reaches the adult stage at all, the adult salamander stage at all. And Julian Huxley brilliantly took axolotls and injected thyroid hormone in them, and managed to turn them into the salamander that nobody had ever seen. So that what happened in evolution is it used to be a tadpole which had a different way of life from the adult salamander, and then it developed sexual maturity at the tadpole stage, and simply cut off the end of the life history. There was a rather popular theory by a man called Garstang, and it may still be right, that we ourselves did that in our ancient ancestry. We are related, as you may know, to sea squirts, to tunicates. Tunicates sit on the ocean floor, and they're just sort of bags of seawater that they filter seawater. But the larva of a tunicate looks like a tadpole. And Garstang's theory was that we are descended from the larvae of tunicates, and we've cut off the sessile, sitting on the bottom of the sea, doing nothing stage of our life history.
Now we sit on the couch.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Evening, Professor Dawkins and Matt. Thanks so much for a terrific discussion.
Thank you.
I'm going to caveat this question by saying that perhaps I haven't been as attentive to your remarks on this topic as I might have been, so forgive me if it's a bit of a redundant question. But your arguments against the attacks on science from the so-called religious right are pretty well documented. But the sort of dual assault from the left, both from Islam and also the identitarian left, so the blank slatists, the gender is a social construct types. My question is, A, did you anticipate that attack coming? And B, how do we challenge it?
Well, I don't think I would make any... Yeah, it's difficult. I find the whole left-right continuum thing problematic anyway, but you're absolutely right that there is an attack on science from people who are often called left, often intellectuals in non-scientific subjects who take the view that perhaps something like opinion is more important than evidence. We're all entitled to our opinions. Everything's a social construct. Even science is a social construct. Scientists claim to be objective and to study evidence objectively and logically, but actually they're pushing some kind of political agenda. I think it is pernicious. I believe strongly in objective truth. I believe that we need to study truth and understand truth and work out what the facts of the universe are. One reason is simply that it's useful. You build planes and cars and ships and spaceships and things on scientific principles. They work. Science works. But also science is beautiful. It's actually wonderful. It's elegant, fascinating to immerse yourself in what we so far know and to work on what we don't yet know, which is also very exciting. It's an entirely worthwhile form of life, and I deplore tendencies to denigrate science and somehow make it subordinate to what I see as rather petty human concerns.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here, Professor Dawkins. Do you think that because of, for example, the abundance of certain elements in the universe and the characteristics of certain elements and the laws of physics and biochemistry, etc., if we were to find life on another planet, that it would be quite similar to life on Earth? Or do you think it could be quite different? Do you think it necessarily needs to be carbon-based? Do you think water is important to life? Do you think if life evolved on another planet, that it would be based on natural selection?
Yes, I'm fascinated by this question. I've talked to chemists about it, and the consensus seems to be, yes, it's got to be carbon. Whatever else, carbon seems to be the only element which has the necessary capacity to form these macromolecules and things that you need. So I think it's got to be carbon. The other extreme, you might say, has it got to be really similar to us? Will there be legs and eyes and wings and brains and things like that? And that's much more problematical. We do have a certain amount of very indirect evidence from life on this planet, because we see convergent evolution on this planet. We see, starting from different beginnings, lineages of evolution converging on the same endpoint. You see this spectacularly in the mammal fauna of Australia, for example. When the dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago, the mammals after a while took over. But they took over separately in various continents of the world, in Australia, in South America, in Africa, and in Eurasia, and also islands like Madagascar. The parallels that you see in these different places suggest that evolution has considerable power to push lineages in the same direction. So in Australia you have marsupial, they're all marsupials. You have marsupial flying squirrels, marsupial wolves, the Tasmanian wolf, marsupial rabbits, marsupial mice, marsupial moles. In South America, there was a similar radiation of mammals where you get convergence. And this suggests that natural selection is powerful enough to make things happen in similar ways. But on another planet, however, and you could also make an argument like something like an eye is such a useful thing to have. On any planet which has light, well, it's pretty much got to have light, there's got to be a source of energy, but where there's not a sort of thick fog, where light can travel in straight lines, then you're probably going to get eyes, and eyes have evolved so many times on this planet, independently. So I think you could predict that kind of thing. But the conditions on other planets are going to be so different. The gravitational field can be much weaker or much stronger, and we already know from the laws of physics, you can predict that in a planet that has a much weaker gravitational field, the whole fabric of skeletons is going to be different. You'll have large animals built like spiders with long, thin legs. On a planet with a much stronger gravitational field, you could have mouse-sized animals built like a rhinoceros with huge, great tree trunk, well, not huge, but I mean thick tree trunk limbs. You can do a fair bit by applying knowledge of physics to predict the kind of differences that you might expect to find on different planets. As for wildly different biochemistries, I've always wanted to persuade a biochemist to come up with a completely different hypothetical biochemistry. Do we have to have DNA? Probably not. Do we have to have protein? Possibly yes, because protein has this extraordinary capacity to be catalytic for an enormous variety of chemical reactions based upon its capacity to fold itself up into three-dimensional forms which determine its catalytic properties. So I think my prediction would be probably yes to protein, probably no to DNA, but definitely yes, I think, to something equivalent to DNA. A digital genetic system, digital because it has to be very accurate, probably one-dimensional, it could be two-dimensional, a two-dimensional matrix rather than a one-dimensional string, unlikely to be a three-dimensional gene because three-dimensional gene cannot be easily read. You can make sort of inferences like this. Would there be sex? No particular reason to think that, but it's worth talking about. Would there be nervous systems, something equivalent to a nervous system? It seems probable, but would it be neurons like we have? No reason to think so. I love this kind of speculation, but it obviously is speculation, but it can be informed speculation. Thank you very much for the question.
Thank you.
Hello. This is less about science or philosophy and more about you, Professor Dawkins. A while ago, you used to put the videos of the YouTuber Jacqueline Glenn on your website. Whatever really happened to that? You've recently stopped doing that.
Have I? I mean, it's not a conscious decision. I just don't happen to have become aware of them for some reason. So it's not a conscious decision. I think she's great.
All right, and also, my most of my family is very Christian, very like Protestant, and I'm an atheist. I was wondering how I could, if you have any idea, like tips on how I kind of let them down softly.
It's difficult, isn't it? I think I'm biased in favor of the full frontal approach, but I realize it's difficult, and it depends entirely on your relationship with your family, and which of course I don't know. But good luck with it anyway.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Hi. First of all, thank you to both for coming out. You guys are huge role models. So my question is for Richard. So this is an issue that been intriguing me for the past year as a psychologist. Ever since Dr. Jordan Peterson refused to refer to students by their preferred gender pronouns. So my question, Professor Doc, in modern times, our university teaching that gender is a social construct that's independent of biology, that there can in fact many types of genders, pangender and agender, transgender, among many others. So as an evolutionary biologist, there's modernist.
Well, when I hear the word postmodern, I reach for my revolver. If somebody wishes to call themselves a different gender from their biological one, then that's their privilege, and I'm happy to go along with calling them that. It's a semantic issue whether they really are. I mean, you can define the sex of somebody by their chromosomes, by their genitals, by their those are the two main ways. Or you can define it by their preference, and so according to one definition, a person may be female. According to another definition, which would be the biological definition, they'd be male, or vice versa. So I don't get worked up about it.
So and I'll jump in for a minute on this, because this gets back to what we were talking about prescriptivism in language. And one of the things I push for is to make sure that we are honestly evaluating what somebody else has to say. So even the people who you may disagree with, or somebody may disagree with, who are talking about gender as a social construct, they have been pretty specific in the language that there's a distinction between gender identity, gender expression, and in no case are they denying the physical facts about biological sex. They are talking about the roles that we take in society, the language around it, the pronouns, the him, her thing, that is a construct of ours. It's not like language was handed down from a god. And so this idea that one can associate an identity with a gender construct, a norm in society, that men are this way and women are this way, which is, it's the pink and blue thing for boys and girls. Used to be reversed. And boys were pink and the girls were blue. The roles that we've developed, some of that is through the natural process of evolution, where you had the hunter-gatherers and you had the going out there and hunting, and certainly there are differences genetically and physiologically between genetic males and genetic females. But when they're talking about gender as a social construct, all they are saying is, I'm identifying with this particular role in society. I think the language is getting in the way, and the people who are equating sex and gender are being prescriptivist about language, and the people who are not equating those are saying, hey, we don't have a better way to talk about this yet, and we're working towards better ways to talk about it.
Thank you. I have a question for both of you. I think, Matt, you've left out a little bit.
since both of you have been so enormously successful as popularizers of science, for those of us who'd like to
Well,
follow-
one of us has
Okay,
popularized science, not
you
me.
know where I'm going with this a little bit. Okay, so for those of us like myself who would like to follow in your footsteps, what advice would you have? And particularly Professor Dawkins, wouldn't mind talking about science writing in particular. I think I and a lot of other people would love to hear what you might have to say.
Oh, I hate the advice question. But since you ask about writing, I suppose I can try and say a little bit about that. Well, obviously, when you're writing about science or anything, you put yourself in the position of the reader, and that seems obviously enough, but many people don't. So, how could the reader misunderstand this? Read it through, looking at it from the point of view of a different person. How would she misunderstand that? How would he misunderstand that? What can I do to make it clearer? I can see an obvious way in which that could be mistaken, so I'll change that word there. Read it through often and often and often, imagining yourself to be a different person. I don't like dumbing down. I prefer to, I like a quotation from Einstein, everything should be as simple as possible, but no simpler. So don't dumb down. I was once at a conference on science communication, and I was inveighing against dumbing down. And a man got up in the audience, as I thought, with a sort of warm glow in his white male heart, and said, "Don't you think dumbing down is necessary to bring women and minorities to science?" So don't dumb down, and I would even take that to the point of, don't be afraid of using the perfect English word, even if it's not a very familiar one. Dictionaries exist, and don't be. I'm never afraid of driving my reader to the dictionary.
Thank you very much.
So I'll chime in with half a moment here for an answer. My answer is pretty much the same as his, only without the book writing portion. If you had any idea how much time I spend obsessing and toiling over, I want to evaluate an argument, I want to do it fairly. So for me, the keys that I give is not so much dumbing down. Make sure you understand things, ask lots of questions, but the biggest key is to actually give a shit about what kind of world you live in. I care about people's beliefs because they inform their actions. And when I found out that I was wrong about things, I wanted to find ways of helping other people who were potentially wrong. And if it turns out that I'm still wrong, I'm open to that being exposed as well. So that's the same thing, whereas he's rereading it to find every way it could go wrong. This is the same thing I did in software QA that I'm doing with logical arguments and debate. By the time I walk on a debate stage or step on the show, I have discussed this topic with myself and with several other people countless times, which is why I turn the show into a game to kind of see how quickly I can figure out where they're going. But yes.
I'm Mohammed Shaban. I think I tweet this time. Not sure if you remember me. But my question was, one of the major insights of Sir Isaac Newton was that the laws of physics could be generalized to celestial phenomena.
To what phenomena?
Celestial phenomena.
Celestial?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry. I was wondering, when it comes to applying the same scenario to the laws of evolution and the laws of biology, many schools of thought and many thinkers, evolutionary biology thinkers, have pointed out the fact that there seems to be a lot of historical contingencies that kind of shape the pathways of evolution. For instance, if you go back to the Burgess Shale in British Columbia, and there's 25 different anatomical body plans. And out of those 25 different anatomical body plans, due to historical contingencies that have happened, only 4 have managed to survive, leave modern descendants, including the descendants of vertebrates. So I was wondering, if you actually, that kind of argument goes, if you actually rerun the evolution backwards and go back millions forward, the likelihood that they would give rise to humans would be null or zero.
What's the question?
Oh, so my question is,
Yeah.
do you think that kind of likelihood is kind of exaggerated in the sense that you wouldn't be able to generalize those solutions?
Yeah, it's very similar to the question that the woman asked earlier. The thought experiment of running evolution, starting from the beginning and then running it again and again, that was invented by Stuart Kauffman. It's a good thought experiment. He said, imagine you could rerun evolution 1,000 times. How many times would you expect to get this? How many times would you expect to get that? Sort of think statistically about the probability of getting the same. And the extreme question would be, as you say, would we get something like humans? There are those who say you would. There's a paleontologist, Simon Conway Morris, who's one of the people who's actually worked mainly on the Burgess Shale, which you refer to. Conway Morris believes that you would get humans. And he's very keen on convergent evolution, which I mentioned before. At least if not exactly humans, I mean upright walking bipeds with eyes looking forward and big brains and hands, that kind of thing. And he makes a good case, and I think you can make a good case for that. The whole poetry of the Burgess Shale, I think, has been exaggerated. I think Stephen Gould's book on it is actually a terrible book. He has this sort of, well, actually, his book is not so terrible as the people who've taken from it the wrong message. Sort of poetic message that in the Cambrian you had this sort of wild, frenzied dance of experimenting with new body plans, and since the Cambrian, the spring has dried up, and we no longer get new major phyla. You only get new lesser taxa. I've compared this argument to a gardener looking at a tree, an old tree, and saying, "Isn't it funny? This tree hasn't produced any new major big branches for years. All it produces is little twigs at the end." I mean, it's a silly argument. Of course you hadn't produced any new major branches, because major branches happen a long time ago. That's the whole point about major branches. And so what happened in the Cambrian explosion was, of course, that there was the same kind of evolution that you get today, and some of the diversity that we see in the Cambrian has survived, and others of it hasn't. So I think the poetry of the Cambrian explosion and the sort of wild, frenzied dance of evolutionary experimentation with new phyla popping up every few minutes, I'm exaggerating, of course, is not helpful. It has misled a generation of people.
We've got about 8 minutes left. I'm going to try to get to some more questions fairly quickly. We'll do our best.
Okay. What's been lovely about this evening is hearing about your thoughts and doing some of that. But one of the things I'm particularly interested in is thinking about where you are now as a thinker and where you're going. And towards that end, my question is, what are the questions that are dominating your thoughts these days on any sphere, political, social, scientific, and what questions or thoughts are helping you to unpack?
Well, I've retired now. So I'm in a way, I'm looking at science from the sidelines. I would love to see somebody solve the riddle of the origin of life. That would be fascinating, because we don't really know anything about that yet. I find the progress of molecular genetics fascinating. It's quite extraordinary how genetics has become a branch of information technology, and how it's just like computers. I love it. I don't do it myself, but I'm fascinated by it. You ask about what are occupying my thoughts in the non-scientific field? I don't know that I can answer that. I mean, I could be terribly personal, but I'm damned if I'm going to.
Yes. From this side over here.
Thank you for coming here tonight, Mr. Dawkins. You continue to be an inspiration as a budding zoologist. And I was wondering, were there any questions in zoology or evolutionary biology that you had that you feel we've had a good or satisfactory answer to in your life?
Do you mean that I myself have?
Well, the questions that you've had that you or others in the field have done work that has produced an answer that or
Well, I
excited
think
about.
I think there's. I mean, I won't speak about myself, but I think that there's great progress going on in the field of sexual selection, which hasn't been mentioned tonight. It's Darwin's other theory, and I think it's a very powerful idea to explain a great deal about life, not just peacocks and things like that, but possibly even humans. And I think it's an interesting idea that has been pushed mainly by Geoffrey Miller, that a lot of human evolution is driven by sexual selection. Darwin himself thought that, and Miller has brought it up to date. And I think the idea that, for example, the evolution of the human brain, which has been such a spectacular feature of human evolution in the last 2 or 3 million years, could the driving force have been sexual selection? Could it be that braininess is sexy, braininess is attractive? Both ways, by the way. Miller makes the point, it's pretty well got to be both ways. It's not like a peacock's tail, where the peacock that has the brilliant tail and the peahen doesn't. In the case of humans, the big brain is the same in both sexes, and so it's rather a nice thought that it might be that braininess is sexy, going both ways. So I think there's a lot of work going on in sexual selection, and I think, although I haven't been personally involved in it very much, I'd say that.
Yes. By the way, there's a soundbite there if anybody wants to grab it, where he had said "sexy" going both ways. Just in case. Hey, Matt.
Hey, Matt. How's it going? I wanted to first thanks both for coming. Like that's my place to thank you. Anyway, I wanted to ask a question that's a little bit about evolution, a little bit about atheism, because that seems to sort of be split on stage. I can't help but get over the feeling that humans just carry this terrible evolutionary baggage that drives us towards religion. Not that it's impossible to get out, or that there's this God-shaped hole in people's hearts, but this idea that, humans on this savannah had to be afraid of a shadow because it might be a predator, basically hyperactive agency detect. I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on that? Is there really sort of an evolutionary force driving people to make the wrong decision all the time? And if so, how do you deal with that?
Well, I like I think the shadow theory is a good one. I think the idea that because what you don't understand, what you don't know, could be dangerous, and there's a kind of asymmetry that if you assume that it's not dangerous, then you get eaten. But so it's probably best to make the pessimistic assumption, and this generalizes to seeing agency wherever you look. So it's not enough just to see for the rain to come. There's an agent that sent it. The rain god sent it. The sun god, the rain god, the river god, and that seems to me to be plausible. That's not in itself a theory of the survival value of religion. For that, I think I prefer to think in terms of survival value of sort of psychological predispositions which might have led to religion. Are we driven to believe daft things? In a sense, I mean, I can see a case for that.
Well, we know that getting to the wrong, having a wrong belief can lead to something beneficial, at least in the short term.
Yes, we know that. I mean,
And maybe in evolutionary time, religion, we're still in the short
Yes.
term.
I mean, we self-deceive. There's a lovely, Robert Trivers has written a book on self-deception, and there's psychological evidence that more than 50% of, I mean, everybody thinks they're in the top 50% of intelligence or driving ability or good looks or which of course can't be true, and it's arguable that natural selection has built in a kind of optimism more than it should.
There's a partial answer to this that I talked about in the past, so I won't go through the whole thing again, where I said prayer works, in the sense that if you're trapped in a cave-in and you pray, your chances of getting rescued increase, not because there's a God there, but because the act of praying may calm you down, you use less oxygen, you extend the amount of time that you can be there. So that's what I mean about a wrong idea potentially having short-term benefits. I would like to think, though I can't in any way demonstrate that it's true, but having the correct belief would not only provide that benefit, but not for the short term, for the long term. Understanding that calming down, I just don't necessarily know that psychologically knowing that if you're calm and breathe easy is enough to make you do it. I would hope so. Yeah.
Hey there. Long-time listener, first-time caller. My question's about
what?
A subjective experience and objective experience. No, a lot of our
So you're talking extremely fast. Could
sorry,
you,
a lot of our experiences are obviously subjective.
You're still talking extremely fast.
The way we observe, there's subjectivity to it. We don't see the entire truth of something. We only see parts of it because our senses are limited. Sometimes it seems that since there's so many different subjective viewpoints, that it's very difficult to ever find an objective truth, and potentially maybe impossible. I was just wondering your thoughts on that. Is empirical measurement, is it difficult given that all that we can experience is subjective?
But if that were right, wouldn't science not work? I mean, the fact is science works rather well, doesn't it?
The fact that you have a subjective experience or assessment of something doesn't change whether the something your experience is also can be evaluated objectively. This is why science relies on independent verification and repetition and these sorts of things, so that my view of truth is that truth is that which comports with reality. Now, you can fundamentally say, I have no way of ever knowing truth, and you can go down the road of hard solipsism, that I'm the only brain here, and you guys are figments of my imagination, which would make my imagination more impressive than anything I could have imagined.
Right.
But the denial of that the fact that we have subjective assessments does not mean that we cannot have a reasonable evaluation of what would be objectively real.
And what about the sort of maybe potentially quantum physical?
But that's a second question, and we're almost out of time. And also, I'm not going down any quantum paths this evening. Yes.
Hi there. Thank you for both being here. With the centenary of the Russian Revolution, well, here, having that in context, my question is there a direct link between human incapacity to live without a god and the rise of a dictatorship that aims to exploit that need?
Is there a
rise of a dictatorship in a socialist society, post-revolutionary society?
What was the correlation again with?
That aims to exploit the need to live without a god in a secular society.
I just didn't get that at all.
Yeah, I'm not sure I follow the question either. Can you just do the question one more time?
So after the Bolsheviks came to power, one of the first tenets that they used, the separation of church and state, finally in Russia, and ended up what we know as the Soviet experience now. So my question is there a need, inherent need in human society to have a god? You cannot live without God.
Is there a need to have a god?
Yes.
Yeah, I see. I don't think there is. I'm not quite sure what the link is with the Russian Revolution. I certainly don't think there's a need to have a God, because plenty of us get along very well without one.
I wonder if the purpose of the question was, correct me if I'm not paraphrasing this, but because government institutionalized atheism went so poorly,
Right. Yes.
is it the case that we then need a God to not go so poorly?
And 140
Yeah.
million people going
No.
along.
No. The fact that, so what happened in Russia, there's nothing about atheism that necessarily leads to any conclusion. Basically, the Russians built a new religion of the leader and this opposition to organized religion. I would rather build a society based on reason, secular humanism. I don't see how secular humanism could lead to anything like the problems that we experience there.
So is socialism the new religion?
I don't need any religion, new or old, but
You could define a religion as something that a lot of people believe in, and in that sense, both socialism and Nazism could be called religions. Or you could define a religion as a belief in supernatural, in which case those are not. But certainly, both Stalin and Hitler cultivated a kind of religion in that they more or less, I mean, Hitler had grace said to him at the beginning of meals, and Stalin had people more or less praying to him. Oh, great Joseph Stalin, we bless you for this, that, and the other. And using more or less the cadences of the Lord's Prayer. So you can, once again, it comes down to what we've been talking about before, is the flexibility of language and the fact that language is our servant, not our master. You can define a religion as an ideology that lots of people believe in and that they're prepared to die for and kill for, in which case both Nazism and socialism would count, and so would nationalism. Or you can define a religion as belief in the supernatural, in which case those are not.
Yeah. And my apologies. Thank you. This is going to be the
quick
last
question. Quick question, Professor Dawkins. What's your favorite Nightwish song?
What, he wanted to know your favorite Nightwish song, but yeah, we don't need it. Go ahead. Last question of the evening. Thank you for waiting.
Well, I've been working to fight air pollution and global warming as my career, and it seems to me that over the last decades there's been sort of steady progress in education and so forth, until maybe I'm misperceiving, but maybe the last 5 years it feels like things have started to go backwards in terms of what's happening in the US with EPA and regulations, or with what's happening in terms of, I guess, anti-science sentiment, like it was said on the left and on the right.
Certainly gone backwards in the last 10 months.
Oh, well, I was trying to avoid the political
I won't
color to
avoid.
my
I won't
question.
avoid it. Trump fucked the EPA.
Yeah, okay. Right, so, yes. So I guess, since both of you have spent your careers fighting against the forces of unreason, how do you stay hopeful that will eventually prevail? Especially when you see numbers like growing religion worldwide, even though maybe in North America the trend is more encouraging. How do you stay hopeful that we'll ultimately succeed?
What makes you think I do feel hopeful?
Fair enough.
Well, I mean, I sort of do, because I think that if you look over the long course of history, it's all, in general, moving in a positive direction. The problem with climate change is that it may be too late. I mean, it may be that we've already gone too far. The Trump disaster I regard as just temporary. I mean, I wouldn't worry about that. It's just he'll be gone and forgotten. But whether global warming will ever.
And on that note, about how we stay positive, I think there's a lot to be optimistic about. I agree with Richard's answer. And, Travis has walked out. I was getting ready to thank everyone and thank Richard, but you're doing that.
Hey, everybody. I just wanted to come out and thank Richard and Matt so much for coming to Toronto for this evening. Have you guys enjoyed the talk?
Please forgive me if I croak. It's because I've had a stroke. Basal ganglion on the right makes me walk as if I'm tight. So if I fall to croaks and squawking, Matt will have to do the talking.
And I think anybody who knows me knows that talking's not a problem. It's ceasing to talk is probably a bigger issue. Hello, Vancouver. Thank you so much for coming out. I know I have some friends here and some other people who've commented on stuff from the show. I'm thrilled to be here, and especially to be here with Richard. I almost forgot his name. It's been a really weird experience. Now, we first met 10 years ago, although there was no reason that Richard should remember it because he was touring promoting the God Delusion and came to Austin, and I had just got an Out campaign tattoo on my arm and happened to be with CFI and came up and showed him, and he rushed over to get his phone to take a picture of it to prove that it was the first Out campaign tattoo. So I know a bunch of other people went out and did it, but I got there first. But I polled some people saying, hey, I'm gonna have this opportunity. Are there questions you'd like to ask? And the one thing that came up that I wanted to ask about has absolutely nothing, or perhaps absolutely nothing to do with religion. And it is this idea that was in, I believe, your second book, The Extended Phenotype. And you've given explanations for it. When I look around the world at the general ignorance on science issues, and I'm as guilty as many other people, what is it, could you give a description of the extended phenotype, we're starting heavy, that also gets to what people really need to understand about it?
About the extended phenotype, we need to understand. Well, that takes a whole book to explain. That's why I wrote it. Okay, let me have a go at explaining the extended phenotype. Phenotype means those things that a gene affects, and from a Darwinian point of view, those things that a gene affects which get it levered into the next generation. So my view of life is that it's all about genes manipulating the world to get into the next generation. The world, in this case, largely means the body in which the gene sits, but it doesn't have to mean that. So normally when we talk about the phenotypic expression of a gene, we mean the effect that it has on the body in which the gene sits, and the body in which the gene sits is the vehicle that carries the genes around. And if the body survives, the genes survive. At least if the body reproduces, the genes survive. It has to survive in order to reproduce first. So that's the ordinary meaning of phenotype. Extended phenotype means that the phenotype of a gene, those aspects of the phenotype which enable the gene to pass on to the next generation, do not have to be confined to the body itself. A good example would be a bird's nest. A bird's nest is quite clearly an adaptation for the genes to survive. It's not for the body to survive, for the genes to survive. Its shape, its color, everything about it may have Darwinian survival value, but it's not a part of the animal, of the bird's body. If you buy that, and you'd have to do the same thing for spider webs and beaver dams and things like that. If you buy that, then a parasite sitting in a host very often manipulates the behavior of the host in order that the parasite shall get passed on to its next stage in its life history. There's a lovely worm called the brain worm, a little fluke, which parasitizes ants. From the fluke's point of view, it needs the ant to get eaten by an ungulate, by a sheep, say. Normally, ants during the heat of the day of this species, the ants would go down into the ground. The fluke wants the ants to go up onto the tops of the grass stems where they're more likely to be eaten. So the fluke actually burrows into the brain of the ant and makes a lesion in the brain of the ant, which changes the behavior of the ant, so it goes up instead of down. that increases the chance that the fluke will be eaten by the sheep, and that's what the fluke wants, using the word wants in quotes, which of course you all understand what I mean by that. This is an adaptation by the fluke genes. The ant is the proximate manipulee, let's say, the proximate victim of manipulation of the fluke. You could call the ant's behavior, the change in the ant's behavior, as part of the extended phenotype of genes in the fluke. So in other words, genes in one animal can have extended phenotypic effects in another animal. Well, if you buy that, then a parasite doesn't have to be sitting in the host. A cuckoo, as you know, it's a bird that parasitizes other birds, makes them rear its young. Very, very sophisticated adaptations, highly sophisticated adaptations. The genes in the cuckoo are manipulating the behavior of the host, even though the host is not, even though the parasite's not actually inside the host. It's still extended phenotype. And if you buy that, then any kind of animal communication, bird song, singing from one end of a wood, influencing a female at the other end of the wood, that's extended phenotype too. So, well, that's the extended phenotype, and I haven't really had time to do it justice, so
sure.
You just have to go and read the book.
By all means, read the book. One of the reasons that I ask is because when we begin to talk about what we typically view genes as doing, and when we extend this to perhaps behaviors, the thing I wonder is how far can we extend it, and where do you draw a line? I mean, there's been a lot of talk about, the God gene and things like this. If we are our genes and they're dictating behavior, is it a stretch too far to suggest that the type of thinking that leads to religious thinking is also in our makeup, and how do you escape that?
Yes, it might be a stretch too far. I'm not sure about that. I mean, I think it's probably true to say that religiosity is influenced by genetics. And the kind of way you would test a claim of that kind would be perhaps to look at twin studies, to compare monozygotic, that's identical twins, with dizygotic ordinary twins. And if the characteristic you're interested in this case religiosity, is more likely to be shared by identical twins than fraternal twins, even if the identical twins are reared apart, which they sometimes are for accidental reasons, then we have evidence of genetic influence on variation. And there is some influence, not surprising. I mean, genes influence just about everything else, so there's no reason why they shouldn't influence religiosity. To be interesting in a Darwinian way, you would need to show that the genes engineer their survival by increasing the religiosity of the body in which they sit. Maybe they do, but that might be a bit of a stretch.
There are people who call the show frequently. I'd love to ask you why people call to ask me questions about science, but we know that the most common answer that I've given when people are calling into the show to ask, hey, this disproves evolution, and I ask them, why the hell are you calling me, a non-scientist on a public access show? Why aren't you out seeking your Nobel Prize and publishing to get,
That's a good point, yes.
I think it speaks volumes about their hypothesis, if it could even be called that they are calling to present it to me. But one of the questions that I got, which I have my thoughts on an answer, but as somebody who's not as versed in the science, I'm probably wrong. Have human beings trumped evolution? Or have we escaped natural selection? Have we, and I know I despise this idea of advancing so far to a point, but are we at a point where we control our own fates and natural selection is just out the window for us?
If we have, then that has nothing whatever to do with this disproving evolution. I mean, that's the important point to make. If that's what they're trying to say, then it just simply is illogical. There's no connection whatever. It is an interesting question. It does appear that we have largely removed ourselves from at least the cutting edge of natural selection. As far as survival is concerned, natural selection matters if it kills you before you have time to reproduce.
Right.
And in our civilization, it's rather... in our civilization, it's rather hard to die young. And so most people reach the age when they could reproduce. So we're no longer being selected for fleetness of foot, keenness of mind, keenness of sight, that kind of thing. Because with handicaps in any of those fields, you can still survive long enough to reproduce. So probably, if there is any natural selection going on in an interesting way, of course there is natural selection against diseases and things like that, but if the sort of interesting natural selection is going on, it's probably with respect to reproduction rather than survival. Not everybody has the same number of children. Some people have lots of children, some people have none. If there is genetic variation in the desire to have children, then that could be, that would by definition be natural selection in favor of something. Well, I don't know whether there is, but as I said before, there's genetic variation in most other things, so it would be a little bit surprising if there wasn't a genetic influence, a statistical genetic influence on the inclination to have children. Or it could be a statistical effect on incompetence in using contraceptives.
Oh, the Catholics are going to come after you for that one, because it's not incompetence, you're just not allowed to do that.
Actually, let me tell you a story about that. It's not, well, it's kind of about that. I was doing a television program, and I was sent out to Kenya, to Nairobi, to the slums of Nairobi, to interview a prostitute, because there is evidence in Kenya of a genetic resistance to AIDS. And there are some prostitutes in Nairobi who are massively exposed to HIV, but who don't get AIDS. And this woman was one such. And she's being researched by actually a Canadian team of geneticists. So I was sent to interview her, and I said, how long have you been a prostitute? And she told me 20 years or 25 years, something like that. And I said, what's happened to all your friends who joined at start at the same time? They're all dead, she said, of AIDS. So I said, well, why do you think you're not dead? And she said, well, God must be looking after me. So then I said, well then, why didn't God look after all your friends? And she said, well, I can't understand that, but I tell you this, she said, God loves condoms.
I want to go to Kenya and interview prostitutes too, but for completely different reasons. So one of the things that was curious to me is we come from very different backgrounds and fell into what we do for somewhat different reasons. I mean, you're one of the world's most eminent and popular scientists, and you have a passion for science education. And I'm just some redneck who was raised a Southern Baptist and figured out this shit makes no sense. And I've spent the time on the show doing what I can to try to have the conversations. You've done something that I haven't done and may never do, and that is you have an entire foundation dedicated to science and reason. And I want to make sure that there's an opportunity to talk about that. What has the foundation been doing, and the goals, so that people who weren't aware become aware.
Yes, after The God Delusion was published, I founded the Richard Dawkins Foundation for Reason and Science, both in Britain and America. I suppose mainly at first as a way in which I could give money in a charitable way both in Britain and in America. It's difficult for a British taxpayer to give money to American charities. You can do it, but it's kind of hard, and you don't get the tax benefits. So I founded these two foundations. The British Foundation was mainly used as a kind of conduit to get money into America, where I thought it was more needed.
It's also, part of this is because, for whatever reasons, most of my fellow Americans, if I say something, they can blow it off. But if it has your accent, they pay attention to it a little bit more.
I was afraid it might be the other way around, actually. I once was unwise enough to reply to the Guardian request to give advice about 2 elections ago, American elections ago, and I gave advice about how nobody should vote for George W. Bush, and I got the most incredible lot of hate mail. You limey, stay out of our affairs, and to which my reply was, the American election affects the entire world, and I kind of resent the fact that we can't vote in it. But I think
so do I.
I got off the point.
When I came through customs, the customs agent said, "Oh, you're going to be giving a talk tomorrow night." I said, "Yes." And I flew in Saturday, and she said, "So you're only here for Sunday, and then you fly home on Monday?" And I was like, "Yes." And this seemed to baffle her a little bit, so she wanted to repeat it. "So you're here for just one day to give a talk?" And I said, "Yes, but depending on the election results on Tuesday, I might be back the following weekend."
Anyway, I digressed. The American Foundation is the one that actually does most of the work, and it's now extremely flourishing, and it's just about to merge with the Center for Inquiry, which is a much larger, flourishing organization in America, and I think also in Canada. And between us, we're doing a lot of exciting things. One of them is the Openly Secular campaign. You're probably aware that in the United States, it's very, very hard for an atheist, or an open atheist, to become a member of Congress. In fact, there aren't any. Out of 535 members of Congress, not a single one admits to being an atheist, and that's a statistical nonsense. They've obviously got to be. Large numbers of them must be. I mean, they're all presumably reasonably well educated. And yet it doesn't seem to be possible to get elected if you're honest in this regard. So you've either got to be religious or a liar to get elected. So the Openly Secular campaign is a campaign to raise consciousness of Americans. I mustn't use that word, of United States citizens. To raise consciousness by making YouTube videos, getting celebrities to make little videos saying, "I am openly secular." And we get ordinary people to say, "I am openly secular," just nice people, sort of people you'd like, people you know. I'm not a devil with horns. I'm an ordinary person who you probably like, and I'm openly secular. So that's one of our campaigns. Another one is TIES, the Teacher Institute for Evolutionary Science. This is to teach middle school teachers how to teach evolution, because they get a lot of pushback, they get a lot of hostility from parents, from some of their children who refuse to listen, stop up their ears, or turn their chairs to face the wall when evolution is being discussed. I've heard stories of teachers who, as soon as they mention the word evolution, their pupils scream, "No, no, no, I don't believe that. Don't even listen." Well, you could imagine that if you're a teacher who perhaps doesn't have very much specialized knowledge, that's quite intimidating. And so, unless you're rather brave, you'd be likely to sort of shy away from teaching evolution for fear of getting that kind of pushback. So TIES is a campaign to help teachers by telling them how to respond, telling them how to teach evolution, giving them resources they can use, giving them a PowerPoint presentation, giving them lab materials, that kind of thing. It's enormously successful. It's run by a magnificent middle school teacher called Bertha Vasquez from Florida. And she has run a large number of workshops for other teachers, and they're enormously successful. The teachers love them. So that's one of the programs that I'm most keen on. And when we merge with CFI, the Center for Inquiry, we'll suddenly inherit a whole lot of other programs, which I'm also very excited about. So it is one of the main things that I occupy my time with now is the Richard Dawkins Foundation for Reason and Science, and now the Center for Inquiry.
And I'm hoping that, well, you can come down and visit me in Texas wherever you want, but there needs to be a focus in Texas in particular, and I don't want to spend all this time talking about my screwed up country, but Texas is the largest purchaser of school books, and it's a single adoption state. And so there is the constant battle going on with the State Board of Education, because they're not just deciding what students in Texas would learn. It would be tough to write off the entire state, even if that were the case, but the school books that are purchased for Texas get farmed out to other states as well. And I'm a big fan of the Texas Freedom Network, which constantly monitors what the State Board of Education is doing, and getting your organizations and theirs and others to work together. We've had some really, really close calls in Texas. And right before I started with the Atheist Experience, the atheist community of Austin had been in the school book hearings fighting. Some of the changes are incredibly bizarre, scrubbing different people from history. But every couple of years, it's a new course that comes up. So we do history, and then it's maths. And I said maths just for you.
Well, and what do Canadians say?
Is it? There's no S here, right? I knew I loved you guys. But this fight that goes on it's bizarre, and it reflects what you and I deal with when we're dealing with religious individuals as well. And some of it, if not the majority of it, stems from religious individuals. When you have the head of the State Board of Education proudly saying there has to be somebody to stand up to these experts.
Yes. We get that in Britain too. You know about this awful thing called Brexit, which is a catastrophe. One of the leaders of the Brexit campaign, Michael Gove, who was then a cabinet minister, actually went out and said, "Mistrust experts. You are the experts here." Well, I'm afraid that's exactly what happened, and we had a vote from people who are manifestly not experts in the complicated, sophisticated economic question of whether Britain should leave the European Union. It is a major catastrophe. What's even worse is that now the government is trying to deny even the right of Parliament to decide the details of what Brexit should consist of. And the High Court has just ruled that Parliament should be involved, and they're now being threatened by people. You'd think you were in Trump's America. And they're now being physically threatened. These judges are being physically threatened because they want to uphold the constitutional right of Parliament, not to reverse Brexit, but simply to decide on the details.
There's really only room for one person in Trump's America, so. But this issue of experts is something we spoke briefly about earlier. The average person is not going to develop an expertise in every area. You couldn't possibly. And so I'm often accused by people say, "Oh, well, you have faith too. You have faith in the scientists." And I continually point out that what I have is not faith. I have a particular definition of faith, that it's the excuse people give for believing something without a good reason. And I have confidence and trust that is proportional to my reasons and the expertise of individuals. But if somebody said, "Richard Dawkins is the world's foremost expert on biology and everything that he says is true," and you become their expert, that is a massive influence that can be abused. And we see individuals going out and specifically getting degrees that they then ignore their teaching and serve as experts for the creationists. How can the average person know who they should rely on and how much?
That is very difficult, and you're perfectly right that certainly one of the leading so-called experts in the Discovery Institute, the so-called Discovery Institute in Seattle.
I'm waiting for their discovery.
Yeah. He actually, he's a Mooney, a follower of the Reverend Moon. And he actually said, Father, that's their word for the Reverend Moon, Father chose me to get a PhD in biology so that I could go out and preach against evolution. So you're entirely right there. But it's a serious question you raise, because you're perfectly right. We cannot all become experts in everything. I'm a biologist, and I'm manifestly not an expert in physics. So is it just faith when I accept the Big Bang, quantum theory? Not really, as for just the reason you give. It's not blind faith, it's reasoned faith. We know that the scientific method, the scientific enterprise, has checks and safeguards. We have refereeing papers, we have peer review, we have repetition of experiments which are controversial. If somebody publishes a paper which is an important finding, it will get replicated, it will get repeated, and if it's not repeated, then something's wrong. So we have the scientific method in place, which has been honed and developed over centuries to guard against self-deception, to increase to make it highly likely that the truth will eventually come out. It's not really faith. So we have a kind of trust in not so much the experts, but in we don't say that he's a Nobel Prize winner and therefore he must be right. We never say that.
Although Bob Dylan is right.
Yes, Bob Dylan. And I think that's rather a nice idea for the Nobel Prize for Literature. But don't you think it's high time a scientist got the Nobel Prize for Literature?
It's not just in the realm of science where we are going to struggle with this difficulty over who to trust. We see it in news reports as well. Which news station do you happen to listen to? That's going to dictate what you think the facts are. And it's bad enough for example, in the United States, I've had a bunch of arguments over the past week or so about politics, imagine that. And one of my longtime friends had made the comment of, oh, well, Hillary's getting ready to be indicted on 2 more issues, but I bet you wouldn't accept this particular Fox News source as credible. And he was right to assume that, but as it turns out, that source recanted, and now, as the news today, they're not going to be indictments. And I'm waiting to see if this person acknowledges, okay, I made a horrible claim based on faulty information, and I'll retract it, because I don't see that retraction often. Instead, it's, yes, but she's still guilty of this, this, and this. Yeah. And if we have that issue in politics, and we have this issue when it comes to religion, and we have this issue when it comes to science, is it just we're all too damn lazy to do our homework, or is it our day-to-day lives are not consumed with matters of biology or matters of fact-finding on a political issue, and so it doesn't seem as important to us even when it should be that important?
I think in the case of news sources, there is the echo chamber effect has often been mentioned. People tend to tune into the television station that they agree with, and so they just get their views reinforced. I do want to come back, though, to the point that science is a bit different, because science has been tailored to put in place mechanisms for avoiding that kind of thing. Just take one example, the double-blind controlled trial, which is now so important in medical research. With the best will in the world, a scientist is in danger of subtle biases in experimental work. You don't mean to, you're desperately trying not to be biased, but it's extremely hard not to. If you're doing a medical trial, you're testing some new drug against a control. If you desperately want the drug to succeed, then your diagnosis of the patients who've had it may be slightly biased in favor of the drug rather than the control. Or you may be so conscientious that you're even biased in favor of the control. Either way, you want to avoid that kind of bias. So the double-blind control trial technique, where neither the doctor nor the patient nor any nurse who's administering the drug or the control knows which is which. This is secret, locked up in code numbers. It's locked up in a computer. Which is the control and which is the experimental drug is not known to any of those people until the experiment is finished, and only then is it unlocked from the computer. So that totally guards against bias of this kind. Science is full, modern science at least, is quite recent. I mean, not that long ago, that kind of safeguard was not in place. Now it is. So science is hedged about with safeguards against that kind of thing.
And it's, I've been accused of scientism, and perhaps I'm even guilty. I think probably the biggest frustration is that most individuals are going to get their information about science from news sources, and we live in a world where every sensationalized headline is the one that's going to get the attention. So it seems like every other day, science, which I'll put in air quotes, has found God or found this, and people don't often go beyond the headline even, let alone to find out what the sources are. And I liken this to what I saw. I was a fundamentalist Christian for more than 25 years and thought that I was supposed to be a preacher. I read the Bible as a child, as a teenager, and then other times as an adult as well. And I remember as I was finding my way out of religion, even though that's not what it felt like at the time, I was studying with the goal of trying to find a way to convince my atheist roommate that he needed Jesus so that we could be in heaven together. And I would read what atheists on some occasion would have to say about the Bible, or what non-Christians would say about the Bible. And when I'd hear what they'd say, I'd say, oh, no, that's not right. I've read this, I've read it many times, I was in Sunday school, you're taking it out of context, you are missing some extra thing. And then I would find, the more I studied, the more I began to realize that no, it wasn't so much that non-believers were taking it out of context, I was putting it into a context that completely biased the way I read it. If, in fact, there is a God who is morally perfect, then when he orders the slaughter of the Midianites, well, that must have been a good thing. There's no way it was a bad thing. When he says that you can have slaves, there must have been some good reason for that. Certainly a morally perfect being, if slavery was actually wrong and this wasn't the case, so you make all these excuses. And I don't know that it's that different when we're talking religion or politics or just in general what we believe about the world we inhabit. Our biases impact everything. And I think the biggest fear I have is that, okay, I've discovered my biases that led me to these conclusions. So now I'm right. Now I'm free of bias, right? So I'm good. And then you find another one and another one. And I was a fan of professional wrestling, and so there's this idea of smarts and marks and then half smarts. And the same thing works in the con artist field and with magic. If you know how people are deceived, you exploit that. And as soon as you think you can't be deceived, you are doomed. You're the one who is now in this position where, I am the enlightened one. I'm not going to fall prey to that again. And that almost guarantees that you're going to fall prey to 10 other things because you've blinded yourself to the possibility that you could be fooled.
I'm very interested in the profession of magic, in conjuring, because it is a professional deceit, but it seems so much like a miracle that I sort of feel it ought to be a salutary lesson to people who are influenced by apparent miracles, that I mean, when you think about what a great conjurer can do, in turning water into wine would be child's play, wouldn't it?
Oh, yeah. Barry and Stuart do it, and they do it very well. So there's one thing that, kind of a side subject that I thought we'd talk about for a minute, and that's debates, because that's what I do. I live to debate. I will debate almost anybody, although there are some people who I won't debate again for reasons some of you probably already know. There's a couple of different issues here. There's a constant battle over should scientists be debating creationists. I think the general line is no, that it seems to elevate that. But we're in this position where, as bizarre as it feels to us, we represent a minority view. The overwhelming majority of people have some sort of God belief, and so we're in this constant struggle as this minority. How should we engage on those topics? Should it not be the scientists doing it? Is it so much theater that anybody who happens to be good at it should be doing it?
I'm fond of quoting Robert May, who was an Australian scientist working in Britain, who became very distinguished. He became the president of the Royal Society, which is the sort of most distinguished position you can hold as a scientist in Britain. And when he's invited to have a debate with a creationist, he says, "That would look great on your CV, not so good on mine." Which is one way of expressing the point you make about the elevation. I mean, having two chairs on a stage, one with a scientist and one with a creationist, it gives the audience the impression that there's a kind of equality to start off with, that there's really something here to debate about, which of course there isn't. There is no debate to be had. The downside to refusing to debate these people is that they then portray you as a coward, or they say you know you'll lose the debate, so you don't want to do it.
Right.
I've even had somebody who I won't name use the empty chair ploy against me to actually invite me to have a debate with him. I refused. Actually, I refused. I already had a prior engagement in London at the time. So he put an empty chair on the stage to signify the fact that I wasn't there. I sort of feel it's one thing to exploit a scientist by using him. It's to use his absence seems to me to be. I wrote an article in The Guardian explaining why I wasn't going to debate with him. And I said, not only will I not be appearing on the stage in Oxford with this man, I will not be appearing in Birmingham, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Dublin, Bristol, and if time allows, Penzance, you know.
And out of deference to your desire to not name him, I won't name him either, but I will say that while this individual desperately wants to debate you, he is desperate to avoid debating me. And he refuses. We even tried to arrange an event where instead of doing a debate, the two of us would sit in chairs exactly like this and talk about our views. And no, there's no way that's going to happen. And that's fine, because you get to decide who you want to engage with, and so does he, and so did I. But he did something rather peculiar. After multiple refusals, he stated that the reason he wouldn't debate me is because I don't have a terminal degree in the relevant field, which is strange because we hadn't even chosen a topic yet. And if the topic were perhaps secular humanism, then I do have a terminal degree in secular humanism, because to my knowledge, there's not one. And I'm pretty sure most secular humanist organizations would gladly give me an honorary terminal degree in order to do the debate. And yet this person runs around desperate to debate scientists on issues in fields where he doesn't have a terminal degree. He's got a degree in philosophy, but he doesn't have a degree in astrophysics or biology. And so my suggestion would be to all of the godless heathen cohorts of mine who happen to have terminal degrees, stop agreeing to debate him and just say that he doesn't have a terminal degree in the field, and you're just using his own criteria to avoid debating him. So.
I've never heard the phrase terminal degree before. It sounds a bit ominous to me. Like,
and that's why I've avoided getting one. It was just terrifying. I know in a few minutes we're probably going to start taking questions from the audience, and I'll have you guys line up, because the two of us just asking questions isn't necessarily going to get to what some of you might want to hear. But there's a potential point of disagreement. Dun, dun, dun. And so I've said before that I've disagreed with everybody in the movement, including me, over and over again. But there's a question that I get that I know you've received as well. And it seems to be one of the most common questions people ask and what people want to hear most. And unless your answer has changed, I think we may give different answers. And so I wanted to explore that for a minute. On the issue of God, what would change your mind?
Well, I used to, and I still really, I think I do say that I, like any good scientist, I would change my mind if evidence came in. And I used to think it was obvious what that evidence would be. I mean, Jesus would return in clouds of glory, and there would be no question about it. And I suppose I would be convinced by that, but I'm somewhat, really it's by the conjuring again. How do I know that it's not a very clever trick put on by Penn and Teller or I mean, when you think of what you guys can do with just card tricks, I could imagine some gullible person being convinced of that's a miracle. Hume's criterion for a miracle, which is more probable, that there really is a violation of the laws of physics, or that you've been deceived, or you're hallucinating, or you've gone mad, or you're dreaming, and it all comes down on the latter. So I'm not totally confident that I know what would convince me.
Yeah.
That's
fabulous. There's no disagreement. So I had heard, actually, I Imagine No Religion 5, I emceed an event, asked you and Lawrence Krauss questions, and this question had come up, and I've heard both of you give an answer, and I used to give the sort of glib answers of, voices and appearances in the sky or writing and those things, and I realized, the same thing, going back to Arthur C. Clarke, any sufficiently advanced technologies indistinguishable from magic. So glad I speak English, American English, partially. But the answer that I came up with, which is both honest and frustrates the crap out of theists, is I have no idea what would change my mind. I don't, and I find it a bit arrogant to presume that someone should think that I would have the capability of distinguishing a God from some amazingly advanced trickery. I don't know. But if you're right and there is a God, that God should know exactly what it should take to change my mind. And the fact that this God has not done this means that either this God doesn't exist or does not want me to know that he exists. Either way, not my problem. I think there's a bit more that we could talk about. If you guys would like to, there's microphones set up on either side. And if you have questions for either or both of us, please just step up and we'll try and alternate between microphones a bit. Did you have anything to...
Do we have the lights up?
Yes. Oh, we can see faces.
Yeah.
So I guess perhaps we'll start on this side. You got there first, you win.
Okay. Hi, this is Armin Navabi from Atheist Republic.
Hey. Yeah.
Thank you. I think you both have heard about Majid Nawaz and Ayaan Hirsi Ali recently being listed as anti-Muslim extremists by a law firm. And I was just wondering if you think, what are your comments about that? And also if you have any suggestions for how we could criticize Islam without being grouped with bigots, and racist, and if you think we have made any progress on this in the past 10 years, because it seems like it's getting worse and worse, and we're just being grouped with these other people.
Yeah. So the Southern Poverty Law Center, which tracks hate groups and things, recently listed both Majid Nawaz and Ayaan Hirsi Ali as, I don't remember exactly what the category is, but labeled them as hate speech with regard to Islam. They're wrong, in my estimation. Is there hateful thought directed at Islam in general? Sure. It's weird when you get into the online community. Quite often, there are people who will do the hashtag #NotAllX. And on some occasions, they'll get mocked. Basically, if we make a generalized statement about some group, somebody will point out it doesn't qualify to every member of that group. Well, of course it doesn't. And this wasn't the presumption. But if there's a fair general criticism of the tenets of Islam or something from the Quran, or a regime that has power that is implementing their version of this, I don't get to decide what a true Muslim is and what a true Muslim is. I don't get to decide what a true Christian is. I don't even get to decide what a true atheist, skeptic, or humanist is. But I do know that saying, well, they're not all bad, is focusing on the people and not the doctrines. And if I focus instead on the doctrines and the actions that some people take, I'm being fair and honest. And if somebody wants to call me a racist for that, okay, fine, too bad. Because I'm not looking at this in terms of race. I'm looking at it in terms of, here's a doctrine, when implemented in this fashion, is dangerous and harmful and counterproductive. There are great people in almost any religion I can think of. And my point is, they could be better if they dumped the religious baggage. And there are bad people in every religion that I could name, and they would be way better if they dumped the religious baggage.
It's a curious thing that the evils of Islam, and I think that Islam is among the great evils of the world, the chief victims of it are actually Muslims themselves. They are the ones who are most likely to be persecuted, especially women. That's one point. Another point is the accusation of racism, as though Islam were a race, which of course it isn't. Ayaan Hirsi Ali and Majid Nawaz are struggling to actually reform Islam from within, to actually recognize that it doesn't have to be bad, and they should obviously be applauded. I think the worst thing of all is the way decent liberal people, our kind of people, give Islam a free pass, which they don't give to any other religion when it comes to things like the betrayal of women, the misogyny that is officially promulgated by Islam is revolting. And yet feminist thought in Western liberal democracies completely ignores that and more or less allows Islam to get away with the misogyny and all the other terrible things that they do. Because of this special treatment, which I suspect it maybe stems from the fear of being thought racist. So, to repeat, the chief victims of Islam are Muslims themselves, and Majid Nawaz and Ayaan Hirsi Ali are doing their best to help the victims of this unfortunate creed.
And there are great organizations working alongside Maryam Namazi's organization and Next Muslims of North America. If the chief complaint is not tied directly to what has been said, then that's just posturing. So I'll have people comment on various videos or whatever and say, oh, Matt might be good on the God issue, but he's terrible on this, or this, you know. And they'll use language that's obnoxious and annoying. But I ask them all the same question. What is my position that you disagree with, and why do you think it's wrong? Nobody's ever even gotten the first one right. Instead, they will saddle me with somebody else's position or something they heard or something that they have interpreted based on their own confusion about what's said. And if we can't get past, we've lost sight of nuance. And it's, if you sometimes say anything that is even vaguely in opposition to somebody's position, you become immediately the worst thing ever. And if we are going to shelter medieval, harmful, misogynistic thought as if, well, we can't criticize that because that would be racist, I don't know how you can possibly criticize anything at that point. Yes, sir.
Hi there. With a recent poll coming from Google saying that internet memes are now more popular than Jesus Christ, I was wondering, have we won? And if not, what's the defining factor that would say that atheists have won?
Well, did the Google poll say that atheist memes were, or
No,
just memes?
Just memes.
Yeah, because cats don't get us a win.
Well, Jesus Christ is a meme himself. I mean, memes simply are cultural, the equivalent of cultural genes. They're that which spreads through the culture by any means, whether it's by humans imitating other humans or radio jingles or that kind of thing. So I think you're using the word internet meme as, for a particular subset of memes, which are kind of rectangular spaces with some kind of words in, and that for some bizarre reason has come to be used as the only kind of meme. It's just one very little example of a special kind of meme. And some of them are quite funny.
And some of them are awful.
Yeah.
I hate bad arguments, and I hate bad arguments, especially when they come from people who are defending positions I hold, because I want the other side to have the bad arguments. And so when I see bad memes from atheist organizations, I look at this Bible contradiction, and it's not, okay, we can do a little better. And right before we get to this question, I want to say to all the people who are back here who are staring at the back of our heads, you don't know this, but for about 10 or 15 minutes before we started, I stood below you and I can see up and I stared at the back of your heads just to make it fair. Yes.
Hi, my name is Reese. I work at Science World. You guys should come visit if you're in town for the next couple days. Earlier you were saying that, which is true, that the large majority of the world has some kind of concept of God or some kind of belief in God. Also, the large majority of the world is very poor, and often these two things go together. What is atheism's role in addressing the poverty of the world and the ignorance that comes with it? That's not really their fault.
I mean, it's a demonstrable fact that there is this correlation you talk about. The research of Gregory Paul shows this both across European countries and across states in America, that poverty, lack of social welfare, lack of social security, that kind of thing, tends to go with religiosity. And people tend to lose their religion when they have security, welfare, that sort of thing. And Scandinavian countries have the most advanced welfare systems in the world, and they're the least theistic. Atheism's role, I mean, I don't see atheism as a political movement. To me, it's a philosophical position. But obviously, as a citizen, politically, I'm in favor of reducing poverty, reducing inequality, and from that, this research seems to suggest atheism will flow.
Yeah, and I agree with Richard. I think that certainly atheist communities are more than just about atheism, because we're people. But it's my humanism that makes me want to fight and eliminate poverty. And I try, when I'm deciding what I'm going to do, there's the think globally, act locally idea. I also try to think about what would the entire world be like if everybody did the thing that I want to do. and try to work along those lines. And so if everybody donated a little bit more, if everybody worked to encourage politicians to instill policies that reduced poverty and suffering, but there's also the limit of what can any individual do. Well, one of the things that individuals can do is vote, run for office, support the sort of policies that are going to put an end to this. A collection of atheists on Reddit can raise a bunch of money and do good, as we've seen, but they're not going to end poverty. And while we as atheists and those of us who are humanists certainly have an incentive to go there, it may be that we need to set aside our differences in other areas and work with people towards specific goals. And so, like the Reverend Barry Lynn is the CEO or the president of Americans United for Church-State Separation, and I adore him. I've shared the stage with him before, and I will again. And I will share a stage with him for church-state separation, and then argue with him tooth and nail over whether or not a God exists if he wants to. And I do the same thing. When I decide what charity I might actually donate to, my first question is not, hang on, is there a religion behind this? My first question is, are they actually doing good with the money? How much of my money is going to go to those issues? What efforts can I contribute besides money to help them out? And then I will compare, hey, is there a secular version of this? Which is why I love Foundation Beyond Belief and organizations that are working to improve secular charities. I would encourage everybody, if you're not familiar with Foundation Beyond Belief, to investigate that. There's also SHARE, I believe, which is Secular Humanists Activists. I'm going to get the acronym wrong, but it's out there to do good and help people. And I'd like to see a lot more effort there. And there's always room. If you don't have the money to donate, which I was unemployed for 4 out of 10 years for a while there, you can donate your time. And you can show the world that instead of the view that they had of who atheists were, we actually are your neighbors, we are scientists, we are jackasses, we are the people who deliver your mail, and we actually care about other people. We care about what kind of world we live in, and that's the reason that we talk about religion, because we see religions, while certainly people do good in the name of their religion, there is a lot of harm, and it could be, as I was saying before, better without the baggage.
Thank you. Hi. Thanks for coming to Vancouver. I just finished reading a book by one of the murdered editors of Charlie Hebdo, and he talks about the problems with the word Islamophobia. So I'm wondering, what are your opinions on using that term, Islamophobia?
I think we've dealt with that in the previous question, haven't we? I mean, Islamophobia is an absurd word. It's a made-up word to describe this privileged position that Islam has in our society, and I do not think it's a word that should have currency.
And the only thing I'd add is, I'm not overly concerned about the labels for things if they get in the way. I just released a video recently about the atheist label, the agnostic label, and things like that. At the end of the day, if Richard had called himself an atheist, and I said, oh, no, I don't want to call myself an atheist, but neither one of us believe in a God, and we're both working towards it, then if the label's in the way, then get rid of it. I don't think the label for atheist is necessarily in the way, but when there are attempts to label people as Islamophobes, merely to avoid having the discussion about what we should or shouldn't address and what are the limits, and is somebody going too far, and should we actually oppose certain things, if the label discussion is preventing that one, then that just needs to go away, because the other discussion is far more important.
I am phobic about beheading people, about whipping people, about apostasy being punished by death, women having their clitorises cut off. I'm phobic about all that. If you want to call that Islamophobia, do, but I prefer not to use the word.
Thank you both for coming. Mr. Dawkins, I've read most of your books, and I've been a big fan for several years, so it's good to see you here. My question is more about AI. I watched a TED Talk with Sam Harris, and I know you've been into computers for several years as well. Do you think we will ever achieve AI? And if so, would that AI ever become religious?
It's an interesting question. I'm not quite sure why it gets a laugh. AI meaning artificial intelligence?
Yes.
Why is that funny?
If I had to guess, I think they're anticipating an entertaining answer on whether or not AI would become religious.
Okay. Well, I think it's a fascinating topic, scientifically, philosophically, actually. The question of consciousness is deeply, deeply mysterious, and it may well be solved by AI research eventually. So I think that's very interesting. Actually, I now understand why there was laughter. I misheard it. I thought, I didn't hear the word religious. I thought you said pernicious. Which maybe, yeah.
It's a toss-up as to which one is more dangerous.
Exactly, yeah. Well, you could program it to become anything, I suppose. So you could certainly, you could program a religious robot if you wanted to. Some of you may have read Douglas Adams's Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency, where there's a character in it called the Electric Monk, which is a robot device, a machine you buy to do your believing for you. In the same way as you buy video recorders to do your television watching for you. Save you the trouble of watching it yourself. The Electric Monk does your believing for you. And the Mark II Electric Monk is capable of believing things they wouldn't believe in Salt Lake City. I suppose you could ask a sort of philosophically interesting question: would evolving artificial intelligence robots evolve towards religiosity in their own right without being programmed to do so? And I can't see how that would ever happen.
Although if they evolved to eventually believe that they had a creator, they'd actually be right.
Hello, Richard. I just want to first thank you for all the work you've done for evolutionary biology and public understanding of science. I first read your book when I was a young boy and growing up in Nashville, Tennessee, in an evangelical Christian family, and it really impacted my life for the better. So thank you so much. My question is, Richard, we know how difficult it could be for a gene to be eradicated from a gene pool, especially the gene is somewhat resistant to some of the antibacterial substance we're trying to use to eradicate. For example, like in the case of SARS, we often use quite aggressive measure to interrupt that. So in a meme of religion, when it often could be resistant to the supposed Q, that is logic, what kind of confidence could we have in eradicating those memes in a foreseeable future?
I only heard half that. What was it? What confidence is eradicating?
What confidence could we have for eradicating memes of religion when those memes seem to be resistant to logic, often, that is?
It's very difficult, isn't it? Yes. It does seem that people who are indoctrinated in childhood, at a sensitive age in childhood, have an almost total, can have an almost total resistance to logic. And I know of some examples of people highly educated in science, for example, who, because they've been indoctrinated as children into the belief that the world is young, they cannot accept, even when they see the evidence, even when they, at one level, understand the evidence. So there is extreme resistance, and I'm constantly impressed in a negative way by the tenacity of religious belief in the face of evidence and logic is one of the most pessimistic things, I think, about the human species, is that it is possible to indoctrinate children so thoroughly that they are immune to logic and reason. But I think it may only be a minority, and I think that what gives me more hope is that there are lots and lots of people who are perfectly open to reason and logic and science, but who just haven't been exposed to it. And therefore, if we try to expose them to it, try to give people the knowledge of science, that they will learn. I have a very encouraging story about a young man who came to Oxford. He was a young earth creationist. He came from, I think, somewhere in Washington State. And he believed the world was young and didn't believe in evolution. He attended my course of lectures at Oxford in evolution. And the end of the last lecture, he came down to the front and thumped the desk with his fist and said, "Gee, this evolution, it really makes sense." And it was clear that he just never met it before. I mean, he'd been to university, he'd majored in biology, but it was left out of the curriculum, as if it was possible to leave it out of the curriculum in biology.
There are some people who may in fact be immune. How do you tell the difference between somebody who is and somebody who isn't?
I generally ask the question of what would change your mind, and if they say nothing, the conversation is over.
I almost agree. I've had people say nothing. That's an expression of their confidence level currently. Doesn't mean it's an expression of their confidence level after an actual conversation. The fear that I have, that I'd like to disabuse people of, is you're never going to talk people out of those things. Yes, you can. I have thousands upon thousands of emails of people who've changed their mind because of what we've done on the TV show or in debates or from Richard's books or the blogs and things like that. And I know he gets emails on this as well. People change their mind. We have to be vigilant in presenting good information to combat bad information. And with some people, it's going to stick. And with some people, it's not, or it's not now. Now, there could be a theist that has listened to the show, my show, and still hasn't changed their mind, and yet a friend of theirs comes up and says the same thing I've said, perhaps in a slightly different way, where they have some connection to them, and then their mind is changed. Until I can tell the difference between the person who will never change their mind and the person who might change their mind, I'm going to keep talking, assuming that they're both in the category of the people who can change their mind. Because that's the only way that you're going to make progress. If you begin with this assumption that this is a waste of time, well, that's entirely your prerogative. There are people who say, oh, you're never going to change people's minds. Well, you're probably not thinking like that. But those of us who do this for a living are going to keep working on it and keep being optimistic, because I want, seriously, my goal is to change the world. I don't think it's going to happen during my lifetime. I don't think it's going to happen on my own. I have tons of people helping in this effort. I am blessed with a great many intelligent colleagues that are working towards the same goal. But having a goal that I can't possibly reach, or probably can't reach, is not disheartening to me in the slightest, because I see constant and increasing progress. And when I read Steven Pinker's great book on the better angels of our nature, talking about we are living in the best of times. When I get emails from people, when I meet people out in the lobby at events who are, hey, I was a fundamentalist Christian, I was a Scientologist, I was a Buddhist, whatever, and because of things that you've done, I've now changed my mind. That's all I ever needed. And I told the story briefly. After a debate, there was a 12-year-old girl who came up and said that, her parents had let her explore different religious views, and after this debate, she was an atheist. And I would debate for another 10 years without changing a single mind, just in the hope of getting one more 12-year-old girl. It's good enough for me.
There are, we get lots and lots of such things. It's very, very heartening, the number of people who come up when I'm signing books, for example, time after time after time. They say they've changed their minds. It's very, very encouraging. One more encouraging thing, let me tell you. There is no legal Arabic translation of the God delusion, but there is an illicit, illegal Arabic translation of the God delusion, which can be downloaded as a PDF. And it has been downloaded 10 million times. One third of that, 3 million or so, has been downloaded in Saudi Arabia.
Wow. And by the way, I wanted to mention that it's the 10th anniversary of the God delusion. It's also the 40th anniversary of the selfish gene, which was essentially your introduction to the world. And while I was 7 at the time, I read it as soon as I could. So, yes.
Professor Dawkins, welcome to Vancouver. It's been, I think it took 21 years to see you in person. So anyway, I've been a fan of your books since 1995, and Selfish Gene was the start. My question is about the God module. As you know, there have been some research done on the fact that, well, if it's a fact, that believing in God and superstitions is hardwired. I'm talking about the research that Michael Persinger did at Laurentian University, and you yourself actually tried the God helmet as well. So if that's the case, if it's hardwired, then I don't think any education can convince the people who are hardwired to believe in superstitions and God and gods. Then I don't think education can do any enlightenment for them to see the reality. And it seems like believing superstitions and God is an evolutionary tool for them to survive the horrible life that we have in terms of survivalship, that they can rely on some sort of supreme source just to go through the hard time of whatever that is. And personally, I think that there is an offshoot in the evolutionary, in the evolution of human mind, and it's us, the atheists, who have the hard wire again to see the reality, to realize that there's no God, there's no creator as such. After, I would say, 20 years of the internet, information is free for everyone. I expected that by 2005 there would be no theist ever. All the information is out there. I can understand, I can see where we come from, 3.9 billion years of evolution on Earth. It's pretty easy to see. I see it, but it seems like 80 to 90% of people can't. If that's the case, that believing God is hardwired, why educate them about something that would be futile?
Yes, I think the phrase hardwired can be overdone and can be understood as being too rigid. I did submit to Michael Persinger's helmet. He's a Canadian researcher who puts a modified motorcycle helmet on your head and passes magnetic fields through your brain, and claims that in 80% of cases he can induce mystical or religious experiences. I was looking forward to this. I didn't expect to see God. I think I expected to sort of feel a strange oneness with the universe, that kind of thing. But I got nothing at all. This was done as an experiment by the BBC, and because it was television, there was only one control, and the control was a local vicar, and he also claimed to have no religious experience under the influence of the helmet. But Michael Persinger told me afterwards that whereas my EEG, my brainwave patterns, were exactly those of the 20% who don't get this experience, the vicar was a prime candidate. He was right in the middle of the 80% who do. But he was, his brainwaves indicated that he was struggling not to submit to this, and he was doing something like reciting the multiplication tables or something to try to shut it out. I think you're seduced by the phrase hardwired, because you take it to mean irrevocable, and so it does when it's normally used. I don't think anybody would really want to suggest that there's neurological evidence that it's hardwired in that sense. We've already discussed the probably perhaps minority of people who cannot be changed. But then we had this, in the answer to the previous question, this more encouraging evidence that a lot of people do actually change their minds. Many of the activists in the atheist movement are actually ex-vicars, ex-priests, ex-preachers, and ex-fundamentalists like Matt.
Yeah, which is why I reject the premise. And actually, I'd like to see him put his helmet on all the members of the Clergy Project to see. Now you've got people who were ostensibly very religious for a great deal of time and are not now. Obviously, we can't go back in time and put the helmet on them beforehand. But yeah, I don't think that. I don't, like I said, well, I'll just go back to my previous answer. I can't tell the difference between somebody who may be irrevocably religious and those who are able to see reason. But we really got to move on to another question.
The Clergy Project, by the way, is another initiative of the Richard Dawkins Foundation. It's to take preachers, pastors, vicars, rabbis, imams who have lost their faith, and there are lots of them. There are more than 500 of them in the Clergy Project now, and give them a website, a refuge where they can
There are
go.
actually more than 666 because I know the person who got that number.
Even better, even better. So these are clergy people who've lost their faith and who are, in many cases, struggling on and carrying on preaching in church every Sunday. And they can go to the Clergy Project website and cry on each other's shoulders and discuss their predicament, because it is a predicament. I mean, they're stuck with this profession that they don't believe in. It's very difficult for them to leave, not only for financial reasons, but because they lose respect of the community and things like that.
Sorry to interrupt. We have time for 3 more questions, Matt.
3 more questions. Number 1.
Thanks, gentlemen, for... Hello. Thanks
what was that
very much.
I did that at a debate and got in trouble for it.
I just wanted to say thanks to both you guys for sharing your time today. It's been 4 months on my skeptical journey, which has started at Hitchens and went to Dawkins and Dennett and Harris and eventually Dillahunty. So
you're moving downhill, is that?
No, I know. No, you jumped there. You jumped there. So yeah, it's kind of a special night for me. And Richard, I don't know if you did this on purpose or not, but those socks just ironically remind me of Christmas. I just had to mention that.
Remind me of who?
Christmas.
Oh, Christmas, right.
But the question that I had was, in your experience, which God and subsequent argument have you encountered that you find the most challenging to refute?
I think literally none.
And I would say the deistic God, because it is so poorly defined, it is untestable, unfalsifiable, it is a nothing. And how do you, I mean, at least some of the other religions are trying to identify and label their God in a way where we can say, this contradicts, this is in conflict with nature and everything else. The deistic God, my thing is, why would anybody believe that? What possible justification could you have for believing, there's something, but I don't know what it is? I mean, aren't you at that point claiming to detect the undetectable, or at least be able to reason yourself to, well, I just can't believe that there's nothing, so there must be something. That it is as useless a concept to me as the word spirituality, which is tossed around. I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. This is spiritual. What the hell does that mean? And you talk about whether or not you put on the God helmet and you have a mystical spiritual experience. I don't even know if I would have one if I would use any of those words to describe it. Maybe I'll put the helmet on and I'll finally understand what spiritual means. But for now, it's gobbledygook. Yes.
Hi, good evening to both of you. My name is Madhvi. I'm here on behalf of what we call SAHA, South Asian Humanist Association. I after 12 years of struggling to keep my thoughts to myself, I recently, a few years ago, have come out and started to voice my opinions, my views, and I've made, most of my friends have, they're there in my life, but they don't like me anymore. I've been fondly labeled atheist terrorist, and I've been told that I'm bombarding them with atheism, and it's too intense for them. So they like me, but they don't want it. If I don't talk about atheism, I'm included. But if I talk about atheism or humanism, I'm not. So, and my husband tells me, maybe you're overdoing it. If you want to keep any friends, maybe you don't want to do it as much. So I'm torn between
do your friends talk
desire
about
to talk about it, express my views, and keeping these friends that have been in my life for over 20 years. And what boggles my mind is 95% of them are all doctors and practicing professionals with 2-3 university degrees. And I'm not able to get to them. Like you answered, you said, where do I stop? Do I stop or do I keep talking? Not caring about whether or I'm accepted.
So do they talk to you about their religious views?
I'm born in a Hindu family. All my Hindu friends send me, we have like a million festivals every year, and I get 300 or so from different WhatsApp groups and Facebook, different religious messages, and I post one related to atheism or humanism or a non-religious post. I'm an enemy.
Sorry, what was that?
I'm like I'm so elated here looking at all these people. I'm like, I want to make friends with everybody.
Do. Motley, this is everybody. Everybody, this is Motley. You guys can exchange numbers, friend each other on Facebook. So the standard joke is that I don't make outgoing calls on the show, and I don't go knocking door to door saying, hey, have you stopped believing in Jesus yet? I can help. I engage in conversations with the people who want to. Now, my Facebook page, my social media, of course I'm going to talk about this stuff. Anybody who is disinterested in that can piss off. But I don't want to minimize the impact of losing people who have been in your social structure for years. And this is something that we deal with all the time. I get email from people who've been ostracized from their families and have lost their friends. This is one of the reasons why there are a lot of atheist organizations creating good landing places. Sunday Assembly, Oasis. Now, they get labeled as like atheist church. They're not that, and church is a necessarily Protestant term, but now I'm being pedantic. What they are attempts for secular people to say, no, religion, you don't get to co-opt this aspect of humanity and claim it as yours. We are social creatures. We want to interact. And my friend and co-host Jen Peoples has said repeatedly, you're family if you act like family. And so on some occasions, as unfortunate as it is, you may need to build a new family and a new group. And that is what humanist organizations and Sunday Assembly and Oasis and these, they're trying to do. Let's build better ways for people to network so that you don't feel like you're alone. I get email all the time saying, I'm the only atheist in my town. No, you're not. You're not even, unless you're the only person in your town. And maybe not even then, if you have like multiple personalities. But I go back to V.S. Ramachandran's research on hemispherectomies, but I'm glad you're here, and please talk to the people around here. And I'm sure, is there anybody here who's a member of a secular organization in Vancouver who would like to help build networks with other people like her that would want to be here? Just interact.
I'm a member of Vancouver Atheist Republic. I think some of my friends are here.
Yes. Unfortunately, I never ended a relationship with somebody after I gave up my religion. They were always the ones to end it with me, and it hurt, and it hurt, and it hurt, and then I was like, hang on, I actually want people to like me for who I am, and if you being a part of my life is conditioned on me accepting what you believe, or not challenging what you believe, or not being allowed to speak about who I am and what I think, I don't need you in my life as much as I thought I did. And it hurts, but sometimes that's the case.
I said that.
I think it is one of the most pernicious aspects of religion that it has the power to divide families and divide people from their friends. And I regularly am greatly saddened by getting letters from people exactly like you say, who say, how can I do this? My parents disown me, or I'm making my parents miserable, and so on. I suppose there are other things that can do that, but religion has the almost unique power to sever people from the people they love, and it's one of the most wicked things about religion, that it can do that.
And we have what I guess is the last question from this side. Thank you so much.
First of all, thank you very much for your time, both of you. And just a quick response to Matt. You said you're not sure whether you would ever manage to change the world. I would submit that both of you certainly have, and for the better, and thank you very much for it.
Thank you. That's a really good way of taking the pressure off having the last question, so good job.
My question is mostly to Richard. In my time at UBC and hearing from my friends at other universities around the world, I've noticed that the climate on campuses has gotten significantly more toxic and more difficult to navigate, to have a free and open discussion about many topics. And drawing on your experience as chair for the public understanding of science, what are specific policies, notions, ideas, ways in which universities as institutions specifically can work to improve public discussion, airing of ideas, and a campus culture that is conducive to the public understanding of science and the general improvement of the illumination of mankind, to give it a lofty title?
Universities need to rediscover what universities are all about, which is a forum for discussion, civilized discussion of intellectual issues, and not to become, well, I mean, I think the most distressing examples of what's going wrong is the university where I first taught, University of California at Berkeley, the home of the free speech movement, which in recent times has been also the home of disinviting people because there's a fear that they might offend somebody. Well, you go to university in order to be exposed to things that might offend you. That's what you're there for. You're not there to be... So I think universities should revert to what universities are for, and to hell with safe spaces and Play-Doh and... Grow up, in other words. Thank you very much.